So we like.
He took the train and he took a car. They woke up at the same time.
No, he woke up later than me. I woke up that much later.
You what?
I don't know.
Okay, everyone, we're gonna start because we have a lot to talk about. Yeah, very small. Okay, to start preschool, we're gonna listen to this video. I couldn't find it. It's a speech by.
No, it's not a speech.
Okay.
It's the submission of the South African attorney on behalf of the South African government before the International Court of Justice, further substantiating the claim of genocide against the Israeli regime. And I thought this would be just to keep us focused, but also as further evidence for the claims made in the call to the Conference on Knowledge, which when you hear the call, you understand.
Okay, so we'll start with that. Hopefully the volume will be okay.
Mr. President, members of the court, it is a privilege to appear again before you on behalf of South Africa. But it's also tragic that we are back here 4 months after this court first ordered provisional measures in this case against the State of Israel. South Africa is compelled to appear before you with this urgent request for provisional measures in circumstances where the alarm sounded by the court on 28 March 2024 that, quote, all the indicators of genocidal activities are flashing red in Gaza, end quote, and in Rafah in particular, is sounding louder than ever before. This is because Israel has defied every single provisional measure indicated by this court in its orders of 26 January and 28 March, and in its decision of 16 February. As I stand before you today, Palestinians in Gaza are not safe. They are not secure. They are still being subjected to an ongoing and intensifying genocide at the hands of Israel. Their future hangs in the balance. Mr. du Plessis explained in his address the assault unfolding in Rafah, the last area in Gaza in which Palestinian life can meaningfully be sustained. The assault on Rafah, which has triggered this application, is inextricably linked to the ongoing genocidal conduct being committed across Gaza. Mr. President, I place before the court again a map of Gaza. I remind the court that Gaza is a narrow strip of land of approximately 365 square kilometers. It is just 6 kilometers wide. The length from top to bottom is just 44 kilometers, which is about the distance between this court and Schiphol Airport. In South African terms, this is even less than the distance between Johannesburg and Pretoria. Rafah lies in the south of Gaza with an area of approximately 60 square kilometers. This time last year, Rafah was home to around 275,000 Palestinians. As a result of Israel's onslaught and its evacuation orders covering more than 3/4 of Gaza's total territory, 1.2 million additional Palestinians fled into Rafah under order of Israel as a place of last refuge. Now, Israel has issued further evacuation orders, directing Palestinians to leave Rafah. In just the past week, 600,000 Palestinians have been forced to flee from Rafah, but with nowhere to go. There is a total collapse of infrastructure, of sanitation, of water, of food supply. In short, the conditions necessary to sustain life for the 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza. The picture on the screen shows Palestinians last month starting to return to their homes after Israel's withdrawal of its occupation of Khan Yunis. As we can all see, there is nothing left. Israel's most recent actions in Rafah bring its coordinated plan aimed at the destruction of the essential foundations of Palestinian life in Gaza into horrifying focus. We are in the final stages of that coordinated plan, where the different actions of Israel, to use Lemkin's terminology, the systematic disintegration of the political and social institutions and the economic existence of national groups, and the destruction of the personal security, liberty, health, dignity, and even the lives of Palestinians have led to the present precipice. Israel has the power over each and every Palestinian man, woman, and child in Gaza to determine if they live or how they die. History warns us what happens next. We cannot simply stand by waiting for that to happen again. It is not possible to recount every story of every Palestinian who is suffering at the hands of Israel's relentless genocidal campaign. Indeed, this court has held in Bosnian genocide that, quote, it is sufficient to examine those facts that would illuminate the question of intent or illustrate the claim by the applicant of a pattern of acts committed against members of the group, such as to lead to an inference from such pattern of the existence of a specific intent, end quote. In these submissions, I show that Israel's genocidal acts against Palestinians in Rafah form part of a continuing, escalating pattern of conduct across Gaza that provides persuasive and consistent evidence of Israel's genocidal conduct. In light of these new facts, South Africa seeks an order from the court, the only order that will clearly protect what is left of Palestinian life in Gaza. It seeks an explicit order that Israel cease its military activities, not only in Rafah, but throughout Gaza. Turning then to the genocidal acts. In my remaining time before you, I will highlight the following features of the genocidal campaign by Israel. First, Israel has continued to kill Palestinians in Gaza, including women and children, at an alarming rate. Second, as a result of Israel's onslaught, Palestinians in Gaza are facing what the Undersecretary General of the UN has described as the worst humanitarian crisis he has seen for more than 50 years. Third, Israel's systematic targeting and bombardment of hospitals and medical facilities and its throttling of humanitarian aid has pushed Gaza's medical system to collapse. Fourth, Israel's direct attack and siege of Gaza's biggest hospitals has led to the uncovering of mass graves, evidencing Israeli massacres of Palestinians seeking shelter and medical treatment. Finally, most recently, Israel has intensified its attacks in the north while pressing on with its Rafah offensive, leaving displaced Palestinians nowhere safe to go. I will take these in turn. The first feature of the genocidal conduct, killing. Since South Africa appeared before the court on 11 January 2024, at least 11,500 Palestinians have been directly killed by Israel. The majority of these casualties are women and children, in an enclave where nearly 50% of the population are children. This onslaught has occurred despite the binding orders issued by this court and the binding Security Council resolution on 25 March 2024, demanding an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan. In fact, as UNICEF pointed out, a double-digit number of children were killed within hours of that resolution. 2 mothers and 4 children are killed every hour. UNRWA head Philippe Lazzarini says, "There are no words left that can do any justice to the people of Gaza. The numbers of dead and injured defy comprehension. At least 35,000 Palestinians killed and 79,000 injured, with 10,000 more reportedly missing or under the rubble. Up to 1.7 million displaced, most multiple times, and more than 70% of all housing stock in Gaza and more than 80% in parts of northern region damaged or destroyed." The second feature is a humanitarian catastrophe. Israel's coordinated plan in Gaza has resulted in a humanitarian crisis, the crisis that this court warned about in January, February, and in March. What Palestinians in Gaza face has been described as, quote, apocalyptic levels of pain and injustice, given that food and other vital aid cannot get in and people, including the chronically sick and injured, cannot get out, end quote. These apocalyptic conditions look set to worsen, with Israel's ongoing attacks on the north, middle, and south, with full-blown famine in the north, moving its way south, and where Israel's blockade on food, fuel, and medical supplies continue. Gaza's children have suffered particularly severely. More than 14,000 have been killed. Thousands more have been injured or lost family members. While an estimated 17,000 children are unaccompanied or separated. Nearly all of Gaza's children have been exposed to traumatic experiences, the consequences of which will last a lifetime. Make no mistake, These conditions are a direct result of Israel's military onslaught on the besieged enclave, with full knowledge of the destructive consequences of this humanitarian crisis. In these circumstances, the thwarting of humanitarian aid cannot be seen as anything but the deliberate snuffing out of Palestinian lives. Starvation to the point of famine, obstructing aid in the face of famine, and killing of at least 200 aid workers. For the court's previous orders to be effective, for the provision of humanitarian aid urgently and at scale, Israel has to be ordered to stop its military offensive. The third feature of genocidal conduct relates to the crippling of Gaza's medical system. Israel's offensive on Rafah has further reduced access to healthcare in an already decimated health system. Only 2 out of 36 hospitals are located within the so-called humanitarian area designated by Israel. In just 6 days, between 6 and 12 May, Médecins Sans Frontières recorded that it was forced to suspend its life-sustaining activities at Al-Shabura Clinic, hand over its activities at Al-Emirati Hospital, and was forced to close its activities in Rafah Indonesian Field Hospital, as it could not guarantee the security and safety of patients and staff with the ongoing offensive. The assault on healthcare within Rafah is the culmination of a pattern of attacks on healthcare services in Gaza, through which the main hospitals across Gaza have completely stopped functioning. After Israel's military assault, after Israel's military seized the Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings last week and prohibited the importation of life-giving fuel to hospitals on 13 May, the European Gaza hospital completely ran out of fuel and experienced a total blackout. Without fuel, hospitals cannot sustain incubators, respirators, and life-saving machinery. Healthcare in Gaza is crippled by shortages of food, fuel, oxygen, medicines, and anesthetics. The obstetric and maternity health system in Gaza is virtually non-existent, and every functioning medical facility is overwhelmed with patients. Babies continue to die of malnutrition and starvation. Nor is there any escape. Medical evacuations are impossible. Israel has seized control of all entry and exit points into and out of Gaza, trapping an already suffering population and inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about Palestinians' physical and biological destruction in clear violation of Article 2C of the Genocide Convention. The fourth feature of genocidal conduct is the discovery of mass graves. In its targeted attack on hospitals, Israel has killed hundreds of civilians, including doctors and medical staff, turning centers built for healing into mass graves full of the decomposing bodies of men, women, and children. On 10 April, a UN inspection team reported that Khan Yunis was reduced to rubble and dirt, and returnees discovered ghastly scenes of unearthed mass graves containing the massacred bodies of the elderly, women, children, and men at Al Nasser Hospital. Blue scrubs reportedly still clothed the dead bodies of medical staff. Many were decapitated. 324 decomposing bodies were discovered, many stripped and handcuffed. Of these, only 42 were identified. Another 30 bodies were discovered in 2 mass graves in Al-Shifa Hospital, with only 12 bodies identified, prompting the UN Secretary General to call for the immediate access of independent investigators. These bodies included women and children, with many reportedly showing signs of torture and summary executions. The recent discovery of multiple mass graves, Israel's ongoing chokehold on information coming out of Gaza, and complete refusal to allow independent investigators in means that we will not know how many Palestinians have been killed by Israel's military campaign for some time, if at all, and only if the evidence is not obliterated by Israel's ongoing military operations in what Commissioner Volker Turk describes as the prevailing climate of impunity. It is for this reason that South Africa seeks an order requiring Israel to facilitate the unimpeded access into Gaza of fact-finding missions, officials, investigators, and journalists. The fifth feature of genocidal conduct relates to Israel's intensified attacks in the north. During the past week, while our eyes and attention were drawn to the horrific acts unfolding in Rafah, Israeli tanks rolled again into northern Gaza, an area that Israel reported that it had cleared many months ago. On 11 May, Israel issued evacuation orders over 22 neighborhoods in Jabalia in northern Gaza. At least 100,000 people in the north have been forced to flee their devastated homes. That same day of the evacuation orders, Israel began a relentless assault on northern Gaza, killing Palestinian families in their homes and children near the Toba Mosque within the Jabalia refugee camp. Journalists report that they have no idea about the number of people killed in North Gaza for the past day, as medics are unable to move due to the heavy bombing. Many people are still trapped under the rubble, waiting for rescue, but no one is able to move under the rains of bombs. As I stand before you, Mr. President, it continues. On 14 and 15 May, just yesterday, and the day before yesterday, the Israeli military issued 2 new sets of evacuation orders for all or part of 19 neighborhoods in northern Gaza, displacing even more Palestinians in search of safety. Mr. President, these are the credible facts. Israel will no doubt once again deny and cast aspersions on the information presented by South Africa and provided by the UN and other international actors, including those this court itself has relied on. It will do so while continuing to systematically attack all independent sources of information about what is taking place in Gaza and refuse international investigators and journalists' entry into Gaza. having denied access to Gaza and attempted to discredit all other sources of information, Israel is then free to portray a picture of Gaza radically at odds with all other accounts. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister's office proclaimed that, quote, the humanitarian catastrophe that has been spoken of has not been realized, nor will it, end quote. A bold denial of the findings of UN experts and other independent agencies, such as the IPC. As this court pointed out, the IPC is a global partnership of organizations, including, amongst others, the World Food Programme, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, and the World Health Organization. Ultimately, Israel says only what suits them, only if and when it suits them, notwithstanding the facts on the ground that have been presented here today. Despite the court providing Israel with an opportunity to respond to South Africa's current request, Israel has failed to submit a response. In conclusion, Mr. President, members of the court, the risks to the people of Gaza are imminent, irreparable, and rapidly increasing. This risk gives rise to the necessity for the remedy that we seek in this application, a remedy that will end Israel's genocidal campaign against Palestinians in Gaza. All of what I have described must stop. Israel must be stopped. South Africa is before you again today to respectfully ask the court to invoke its powers under Article 75(2) of the rules of the court to order a remedy that will stop Israel.
I just thought this, first of all, to reground us in this year of Baldwin, in the face of the great student movement and in preparation for our upcoming conference on knowledge in the university. There's just another article that was in the New York Times, which I read as a confirmation of our one second, I'm gonna get the time, of our argument or our statement that that Israel is a fascist regime, a Nazi regime, in fact. The unpublished, how extremists, the unpunished, sorry, how extremists took over Israel. You can, it's an audio, it's quite an article. But those two, this and then the other thing. So I just asked Emily whether it would be all right if we kind of started with that and go to Cordoba and Sambarto, in preparations for the conference on knowledge and the reading of the call to the conference. Also, I just want to mention Viet-Lao Khmer has just come out with a statement on Southeast Asians, and solidarity with Palestinians based upon the specific experience of Southeast Asians under U.S. bombing and such and so forth. Maybe we could read that today. We'll sit here.
Okay. No, as heartbreaking as it is to listen to that, I think it's important. I just wanted to, so I'm going to read out the call we wrote for our upcoming conference, which we've titled The Crisis of Knowledge and the American University, James Baldwin and the Struggle for Our Human Future. And in dealing with the crisis of the university, we deal with the influence that Zionism has had over the American university for a very long time now. And I just wanted to begin by saying that the necessity to engage with this question is both for our sake, but also for the sake of the Israeli people, because I don't know what this describes, what the I think this is a fundamental attack on what it means to be human. And the New York Times article also confirms it, that what was considered to be a democratic state, how it has devolved into something so inhuman and fascist, Nazi. So I just wanted to begin with that, but I'll read out the call. Okay. America today stands at the crossroads of history. The impoverished, war-weary, and despairing masses are rising in rebellion against the most corrupt and inhuman ruling elite the world has ever seen. The American state's unabashed financial, military, and ideological support for Israel's genocidal war on Gaza has further deepened this crisis of legitimacy, fundamentally upending the political calculus of one of the most consequential elections in this country's history. On one hand, this is a moment of shared outrage and disbelief at the barbarity of the civilized West. Equally, this is a moment of reckoning that calls for ideological clarity and moral courage. At the heart of this reckoning is the crisis of the American university, precipitated by the brave and moral stand taken by students all over the country against the genocide in Gaza. The brutal repression of these protests exposes the unparalleled Zionist influence over America's elite universities and their inseparable ties to the war agenda of an imperialist state. Neither is such repression without historical precedent, but our time presents new questions that need new answers. Western science and academia are the pillars on which Western civilization bases its claim to supremacy. White supremacy and its particularly vicious manifestation in Zionism is the foundation stone of elite institutions of learning in this country. White supremacy in this context is more than just overt racism. It is an utter contempt for the ordinary human being which does not spare the white working poor. This disregard for human life and dignity is clearly revealed in the elite university's direct and indirect investment in war and human immiseration, and its uncompromising support for the Nazi state in Israel. It is also revealed in the parasitic relationship the university has to the cities it inhabits. Its complicity in the deindustrialization and gentrification of urban centers, the disinvestment in people's institutions, and the school system goes hand in glove with promoting a professional managerial class with highly concentrated wealth that is completely removed from ordinary people and bears no responsibility to the communities it displaces. What does the American university have to offer to the young person that arrives at its threshold with a genuine desire to know the world and use that knowledge to take humanity forward? It tells them that their only future lies in the pursuit of safety and a high paying career. It promises them every privilege the white world has to offer as long as they're willing to jettison their moral core and obligingly assimilate into the ruling elite's life world of decadence and irresponsibility. It separates them from the people who produce them and from a knowledge of themselves and their history. Today, with everything to lose and very little to gain except their own humanity, the students have decided that their life must amount to more than this. 1 second. In taking a stand against the genocide in Gaza and the university's complicity in it, they have taken their rightful place among the people of the world and the struggle for our human future. The crackdown on dissent, the stifling of free thought and speech, the forced resignations of presidents of some of the most elite institutions for not dealing with the student movement with a harsher hand, has revealed to them the ruthlessness and moral bankruptcy of the American university. The students see that the university's commitment to truth and knowledge pales in comparison to its commitment to its Zionist donors and war. They now know that the freedom these institutions claim to uphold stops short of the freedom to be a revolutionary. They're breaking their silence, saying we will study war no more. We will no longer be made to stand idly by in the face of injustice and human suffering. They're demanding a new, more substantive freedom and a new basis for knowledge that is centered on the moral imperative and the human being. The brutal and cowardly military repression brought down on peaceful student protests across the country reveals that their demands hit at the very heart of empire. Western academia is the basis on which the Western ruling elite exercises hegemonic control over the ideological landscape of the world. The crisis of the American university is rooted in an epistemic crisis of knowledge, which calls for reflection and a reassessment of the assumptions on which knowledge production is based. How we know, that is the scientific method to discover new knowledge, must be preceded and informed by why we know or the purpose of such knowledge. If the institutions of knowledge production are tied to war, the purpose of such knowledge is war and the creation of individuals well adjusted to war. In the struggle to bring forth a future centered on humanity and peace, it is imperative that we question the philosophical, ideological, and epistemological foundations of scientific and intellectual activity as it is practiced today. The dominant view of science, which is the white view, is that science is the concern of a select few experts who must pursue it as a disinterested and neutral activity. When the scientist and scholar is allowed a narrow autonomy over their field of study, they cannot uphold political, ideological, or moral positions that challenge the values and assumptions of the ruling class and their interests. Thus, academic freedom, an institution hard fought for and crucial for free and democratic knowledge production in service of the truth, is under attack in the same American university which claims to be its ultimate arbiter. The overarching ideological framework across all disciplines in Western academia is postmodernism, which attacks the existence of an objective truth. By doing so, these theories attack the possibility of knowledge itself and the capacity of the human being to know the world. The human being is reduced to an abstraction, only revealed through increasingly narrow categories of identity, and never in the fullness and complexity of the universal human condition. This worldview, rooted in the centrality of the individual and individual liberties, is self defined as progressive and imposed on intellectuals the world over. It is also the basis on which Western academia mounts its authority as the gatekeeper of discourse, narrative, and method. Today, however, we find ourselves in a pre revolutionary moment. The American state is unraveling, and an overwhelming majority of the people of this country demand a fundamental revision of the political and economic system. In such times, the possibility of a revolutionary transformation of human beings, human social relationships, and thought becomes real, and ideological clarity becomes essential. Every revolutionary moment needs knowledge and theory, principles to guide this transformation and show the path forward. If the American university is fundamentally anti revolutionary and anti human, where is the basis of such knowledge that serves the democratic and emancipatory possibilities of a new American people to be located? This year marks the 100th birth anniversary of James Baldwin, the greatest essayist of the English language and a revolutionary witness for the Black freedom movement, the Third American Revolution. In celebrating the year of James Baldwin in Philadelphia, we celebrate his literary, philosophical, and ideological genius, as well as the life work that produced him, which is the Black freedom tradition. We believe that this rich body of knowledge and revolutionary thought that stems from the life works of W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., and Baldwin himself offers us a philosophical and epistemological framework that holds the key to our future. In this symposium, Baldwin will speak to the current moment as a revolutionary thinker and philosopher who has a message for humanity. He illuminates a way to know the world that is centered on the struggle for human freedom. This epistemology and its possible consequences for knowledge and a human future challenges hence the assumptions of the ruling class and the ideological landscape it shapes. Baldwin speaks as someone produced by Western civilization who categorically rejects the standards of the West. He turns the logic of history on its head, asserting that it is white civilization that is held captive by its history of slavery and imperialism, preventing it from joining hands with world humanity as it moves towards the future. Dismantling the myth of white supremacy, which makes its adherents incapable of achieving their own human possibilities, is therefore the only path to maturity in this still adolescent country. Central to Baldwin's epistemology is his revolutionary love for humanity. For him, love is a human precondition for knowledge that aligns creative and intellectual activity with the project of human freedom. This emphasis on love is a philosophical transgression of Western logic and modes of thinking, which are centered on the individual and European rationality. This is also why Western intellectuals are woefully inadequate in explaining the meaning of the great changes taking place in the world today. The forward movement of human knowledge demands an epistemic break with the Eurocentrist limitations of the West and a new way of knowing the world that is rooted in love for humanity. Lastly, the symposium is also our humble tribute to the brave men, women, and children of Palestine who are making the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of the future of all humanity. It should not be lost on us that while elite universities are engaged in the ruthless dismantling of the student protests in the name of preserving peace and the sanctity of centers of learning, every single university in Gaza has been decimated. Hundreds of schools have been leveled, and many thousands of students, teachers, scientists, writers, and poets have been murdered by Israel. Yet they persevere, fearless in their defiance of the Nazi Israeli state, glorious in their martyrdom and their undefeated faith in the future. We call on all peace loving people to join us in paying our debt to Gaza. The demand for a new basis for knowledge is also the demand for a new world order, which places human freedom and peace at the center of its concern. Every scientist and every intellectual must choose in this urgent moment to stand with humanity or with the enemies of human freedom and knowledge.
So, I guess, so Marta,
I can talk a little more about the conference itself.
yeah, we should go through the details where it's going to be held. The time. We have tickets here as well.
Yeah. So, okay, so first I want to say that the call it really shapes the symposium in the sense that I really do see the symposium as an elaboration of the call, to make clear the purpose of why we're doing this today. Like, why are we talking about knowledge and in everything that we talk about the call. So it's an elaboration of that. So, to begin, the conference will be held at the Church of the Crucifixion on June 1st and 2nd. The first day will start at 9. And we have, so the first agenda on the first day, we're going to have, most likely we're going to have a compilation of, some videos and clips from Baldwin to really ground us on why we think Baldwin, contains a key, like, the call says, why Baldwin contains a key for this time, for our time. What does he have to show us to answer this question, to find a resolution of the crisis? And we're going to have, I'm going to begin with a panel titled "The University as an Arm of the State: Science in the War Economy and the Consequences for Knowledge." And here the idea is we really want to explain what the nature of the crisis is. And as you mentioned with the recent article on New York Times, which really shows, it reads to me like the state of Israel has been fooled by the Zionist movement and the reach of Zionism in world scale, and then the influence of Zionism at the university. This really brings to question the university, the American university, as the pillar of Western civilizations, as as we have been talking about. And the university serves this role by, it derives this authority from its claimed purpose as a center for knowledge production. And, if that is really the purpose, the student movement is then a defense of the university.
Right.
So we really are at a moment where the student movement has clarified the place of the university and the revolutionary demand in our time. And in this panel, we want to talk about if the university is in crisis, if the role of Zionism in the university has made it completely, committed to the ends of war and Zionism as opposed to truth and knowledge, uh, then it brings to question what the nature of knowledge is that is produced by the university. And, the purpose of knowledge is, or the pursuit of knowledge is also tied to the purpose of what this knowledge is used for, and therefore we want to really investigate what the nature, or what the changing nature of white supremacy is, because the university upholds white supremacy in its most essential form, which is a disdain for the ordinary human being. And we want to also ask and investigate for ourselves what kind of human beings are produced by the university today. Like what kind of human beings can be produced by a framework of knowledge that is rooted, that's rooted really in an abstraction of war to produce a knowledge that's divorced from the human being and the human ends. And we want to find out what kind of, what is the nature of the human personality that is produced by the university. So, and here we'll also talk about the parasitic relationship, and how the war economy actually operates in America, and the kind of relationship the university has with the cities it inhabits, the role the university plays in displacing ordinary Americans at the same time that is committed to the war agenda abroad. So the first panel is going to, we want to mostly talk about explaining the nature of the crisis, which is the introduction really. And in this panel, we're going to have Noori, Meghna, and Raju are going to be the speakers, and I'm going to moderate this panel. So okay, so the next on the next item on the first day is going to be a roundtable discussion titled Knowledge, Theory, and Ideology in the Black Freedom Tradition. And in this roundtable, we're going to have talk as sort of a keynote to give a keynote address, and we have Jahan, Purba, and Alice as discussants, and Nandita is going to moderate it. And the purpose of the roundtable is to really propose, to really assert that the Black freedom tradition, and especially Baldwin, it proposes an epistemic break from the assumptions of Europe, the Western assumptions. And the proposition really is that knowledge is centered, like we say in the call, it's centered in the struggle for human freedom. And here, I think we want to talk about what comes out of, especially what comes out of this of the revolutionary science that comes out of Du Bois in particular, which is also embodied in the life world of the Black struggle and Baldwin, which is that in America we must identify, as Du Bois identified, the Black worker as the principal agent of revolutionary change. And I think this is what lets us see that the revolutionary chronology in America begins in America. And I think it's important to investigate the chronology here in America, because we have to ask the question, does the revolutionary thought of Europe serve us today? And it's really a question we have to ask to see the path forward in our time. Where are we to find revolutionary theory that can serve us today? And this is where we talk about, what are the options for us? And we have, this is also a time when we have a lot of, there's a lot of talk, a lot of different theories. We have the effect of, we have the American left to deal with, and like what the left sees as the way forward, and we want to ask whether or not that serves us today. And what is the revolutionary demand of our times? Is it the class struggle as a dogmatic formulation of the class struggle in Europe, or is the revolutionary demand peace? And peace is everybody's business, as Ramesh Chandra says. So we really want to figure out and assert that the Black freedom tradition has a different way forward, which is indispensable to the revolutionary process in America. And I do see this roundtable is going to also ask the theoretical question of what is the relationship of theory to revolutionary change, especially the question of general theory and special theory. And I say this because we do see the general theory of European revolutionary thought of Marx and Lenin as what Du Bois does apply to American society, but then he bends that theory. He bends theory because he sees the Black worker as a principal agent, and this is the discovery of a new theory. He makes a fundamental discovery, a scientific discovery in America. But today, after 100 years of the world anti-colonial struggles and the peace movement and the Black freedom movement of the last century, we want to ask the question, what is the new general theory that can serve our time? So, this is also a question to evaluate the nature of knowledge. How is knowledge to move forward? Or are we to go back 100 years back again and again until we find no way forward? So this is the first day. The second day we start a little later. We start at 11, and the first panel is titled "The Counter-Revolution Against Knowledge: Postmodernism, Identity Politics, and Pessimism." And this is again it's also a theoretical investigation of the forward movement of knowledge itself. We want to talk about, like the call says, postmodernism as the ideological framework that serves the ruling class. And really, the effect of postmodernism is to state that human beings are incapable of knowing the world in any meaningful way, which is to say that they're incapable of knowing the world in a way to change it. And identity politics and pessimism are really I think they're the consequences of postmodernism as the ideological framework that serves the state. And here we want to talk about this question, the purpose that postmodernism serves in the search for knowledge or the counter-revolution against it. It comes in many dimensions. It comes in the different theories in science that are seen as the epitome of science today. It's also seen in the relationship of art to the struggle for knowledge. And how does art play a role in this? How does science play a role in this? And I think what we see, because we have been thinking about this every week for years, I think we see that postmodernism as a theory, it represents the European tradition, which is centered on the individual. And what we get from the Black struggle is a different way of knowing the world that's centered on the human being. So, we ask the question, in the forward movement of knowledge in our times, can science proceed by still being divorced from the human being? Can a science that's rooted, or a way to know the world that's rooted on the individual and individual liberty, is that enough to serve our time, or do we have to look somewhere else? And this is, I think I said this, but this is really a critique of how knowledge is to move forward, which means that at every point, the task of humanity is to investigate the body of knowledge that, the vanguard of knowledge today, and to ask the question, how is it to move forward? So our time, our task is the same task, is to figure out where is the vanguard of knowledge, and does it serve us? If it doesn't, we have to identify where, what its limitations are, and how do we move forward. So, and I didn't mention, but in this panel, the speakers are going to be Nandita, Jeremiah, and Emily. and I think Purva is going to moderate this panel. So that's like 3 out of 4. And finally, we have the last roundtable, which is going to be titled The Revolutionary Philosophy of James Baldwin and Our Path Towards a Human Future. And I think this roundtable is really our assertion, that like, we have to look at the Black struggle, at what it gives us, the life world that the Black struggle gives us. And I believe that this is something we sorely need today, the world sorely needs today. And the philosophy that comes out of it, the philosophy that Baldwin especially articulates, I think the central assertion is that the transformation of the world begins with the transformation of the human being. And if we are to accept this, if we are to accept that the transformation of the human being is essential to revolutionary change, then there has to be a way to know the human being. There has to be a way to know the human being that's rooted in furthering of human knowledge. And I want to say that, I think Baldwin is really special because of what he's, or how he describes the white condition. And how he describes the white condition is something that it's not only America, but what the entire world needs today because of the reach of America and the reach of white supremacy, which means that whiteness is no longer something we can see as something outside of us, but we really have to investigate how it is how it shapes our thinking, how it shapes the world, and what, in order to be able to see the crisis, first America needs to heal as a society. It needs to heal as a society. It needs to, we need to see that there is such a thing as becoming full human beings. And only by accepting that we are not yet full human beings do we have any hope of becoming one. And in this roundtable, I think we want to see Baldwin as we want to see Baldwin as a witness to whiteness, also as a witness to the Black struggle, but also as a witness to the white condition and whiteness. And what do we have to get from Baldwin's thinking at this time? And I want to say that one of the things which we get from Baldwin is his notion of, he has how he describes the two concepts of invention and discovery. And he talks about whiteness as an invention, which is rooted in the invention of the Negro, or or invention of the worst in humanity that's outside of you. And Baldwin's assertion is that the consequence of this is that white America is yet to become a people. And he sees this possibility of a new American people being born. And this roundtable, I think, it serves the purpose to for us to figure out what is the way forward for new America, to be born. And the final thing is, in this panel, we also, I think, one of Baldwin's contribution to this question of whiteness and the way forward. It comes in many dimensions, and I think one of those is his articulation of the meaning of the blues as the blues being an answer to, or the blues being a search for humanity, which was denied. It was denied, and therefore, in this search, it discovers what it really means to be human beings. And I think this knowledge is, or this way of thinking, it's a different way of thinking, which allows a new way of moving forward, a new way of thinking about what it means to be human beings. And the consequence of this search and finding the human core in ourselves is also to reach a personal authority that he talks about, which is unassailable because it has been forged at fire. It has been forged under fire. And we really want to say that if knowledge is to move forward, it has to be rooted in the universal human condition. And we look to Baldwin as a student and teacher of the human condition. So maybe I'll stop there, but we can. These are the initial thoughts.
Yeah, this is quite ambitious undertaking, and I'd like to really thank Symposium for this brilliant call and very courageous call, by the way. And there are certain claims here that are the bedrock of this symposium. One, that the university, as presently constructed, is an arm of the state. By that, we're talking about the major universities, the Ivy Leagues, the major research universities like the University of Michigan, Stanford University, UCLA, and on and on and on. These are arms of the state. The other thing is the claim that the state itself has become a reactionary, war-oriented one. The other thing, and this is, I think, something we have to stand by, and I think so much that we will present confirms this. The inordinate, you could even argue, predominance of Zionist ideology in every discipline, in every major department, in every major university. You are not going to go to any Ivy League college and not confront the hegemony of Zionist ideology. The other claim, which goes along with this, that the Israeli regime is a Nazi regime, and we have to hold to that. There is no retreat from this claim. All of this settler colonialism, all that's well and good, but it don't get to the essence of what is the nature of the state. It is a Nazi regime. And I think the documents, the New York Times Magazine article that we talked about, of course, this testimony before the International Court of Justice, and we could go on and on, which we will. And then, of course, this is something we have not fully teased out or discussed. How the distance separating the Israeli regime from the American state. It is almost like they're the same. In fact, when one looks at the overarching influence of Zionism and Zionists on the US state, it is almost as though the Israeli and the American state mirror one another. Hence, the unraveling and crisis of the Israeli state is a crisis of the American state. And so we have to talk about that. We have to work that out. And we have to state it in no uncertain terms. You know what I'm saying? The student movement, as you all have put it in the call, is precisely this great movement that has exposed and sharpened the contradictions within the university.
Right.
Now, a lot of people say, for example, one of the things that Emily and I talk about is this hands-off attitude of the labor movement or labor leaders, which is the labor movement, because they don't want to do anything to hurt Biden. As though hurting Biden or not hurting Biden takes precedence over the lives of Palestinians and the genocide being conducted against them. The labor movement, the labor leaders have to be condemned in no uncertain terms, all of them. And no amount of talk about a general strike in 2028, that's bullshit. Or we organize this plan. Oh, that's good if you organize the plan. But that does not fulfill the moral responsibility of the working class and those who claim to be leaders of the working class. Now, we got to go forward with this. A lot of people say, well, you're just talking about students. Yeah, we're talking about students.
Right.
Who are playing a strategic role at this time. Yes, we're talking about students. Yes, we're talking about students at privileged universities. But that does not discount the political role at this time in history played by the courageous student, greater than any student movement in the history of the United States, including the 60s. Like I always say, I'm from back in the days. I don't want to hear all that back in the days talk. You know what I'm saying? Columbia in 1968 did not rise to the level of Columbia in 2024. But then when Columbia became 100 universities, it was totally something different. We've never seen this. And then, we're talking about Baldwin. And, we, like you said, we run up against this headwind of the left, which is a marker, signifier. But once a person says that, you can almost say that the person is ideologically out of touch with the world in which they live. They have no idea. They're looking backward rather than forward. They're looking everywhere but at the American revolutionary process, and certainly everywhere but to the major force, as you say, the Black proletariat. This claim can be upheld, must be upheld. And of course, I'm talking too much, but this is a political conference at a political time, at a time of crisis. And on that basis, we invite all. I am so disgusted with the labor leaders of this country. Shawn Fain, I know the Communist Party and other quote leftists and all that. Shawn Fain, fuck Shawn Fain. If you don't rise to the moral imperative, which is the same as the revolutionary imperative. If, like I heard the president of the Teamsters in an interview, they asked him about, what about Gaza? Well, I'm concerned with the day-to-day life of the American. Have you ever heard of Martin Luther King, fool? The bombs dropped in Gaza also explode in Detroit. But this is their way. And this is throughout the labor movement. And this is what totally exposes the bankruptcy of these social democrats who control so much of the levers and the staff of unions. Their avoidance of the central question of peace is their way of defending, as you say in the call, defending white supremacy. It is a defense of whiteness. I don't give a fuck, excuse my love. I don't care how you cut. We have to go by what the majority of our members. Well, you don't know what the majority of your members think because you don't care what the majority of your members think. But even take that claim, that is a default to whiteness.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? I would say that we have to keep our eye on the political pride. We are going up against the ideological force of the major centers of ideology in the West, the American university. You ain't waging no ideological struggle unless you deal with this. You know what I'm saying? And I think, we'll find where I know in the last panel we're talking about the Baldwin Du Bois fusion or synthesis. What comes out of that region of thought? You dig where I'm coming from? What is implicit in that? what is imminent in that? What is generative from that? You see what I'm saying? So all of this performance and Adorno and Horkheimer, interesting and exotic names, but what the fuck do they tell you? Nothing. And then, of course, and we have tried in free school, and I guess we will continue to try. We've looked at synthesis of Lenin and Du Bois. Lenin is not enough to explain the American trajectory, the American logic, the American historiography, unless one believes that a set of propositions can explain concrete reality. Concrete reality must be studied scientifically based upon the concrete situation. That is the role of the empirical in the scientific process. You can't not study the objective conditions and then say, well, we got a proposition here that says that history will proceed this and the other way. That's bullshit. You know what I'm saying? So we are opening up a new region of thought and hopefully a new front in the ideological struggle. And I think this question is in the call, is beautifully done, of the Israeli Nazi regime and its almost inseparability from the US state, which gets us into state theory. And of course, the epistemological question of the individual, quote, rational individual, as opposed to the human being. Baldwin, let us say, in contrast to the Enlightenment rationalist philosophy.
Yeah, can I say something? I wanted to add to what you were saying, because it's true that Baldwin, like his subject is the existential, or like how he says a sense of life or a state of being. This is his subject, as as like both the concrete universal human condition, but also it's a category of knowing the world. This is how the way he says we have to know the world is through the human, it's through the state of being. And the thing is, I feel like it's also exciting because with like postmodernism, like maybe this is the most generous reading I can give it, but the way it comes about is to ask the question that, okay, it's really it comes about to say that like human knowledge and knowledge about the world and so on, it cannot, like it has to take into account the state of being of the entire world.
That's right.
That's the claim of
it. Right. And not the European man as the model of man himself, quote unquote.
Right.
This is very, by the way, I just want to say, we intend to deal with artificial intelligence, string theory, and Judith Butler's gender theorizing, and examples of this. So, you're taking, this will be quite ambitious and so on.
I just want to say one, like, just to conclude this conversation, maybe, but I think intellectual and scientific activity for the longest time has been divorced from the moral imperative, where most intellectuals, most scientists have been cowards, in taking stands that matter and taking themselves seriously or respecting themselves enough to say that, when I claim to pursue knowledge and truth, I also have a certain responsibility to the truth, to the human being. And, Michelle and I, we were talking about King's assassination just 2 days back. And King's assassination, when he gave that speech beyond Vietnam, Time to Break Silence, I mean, he basically warns us of this kind of a devolvement where he says this will not stop with Vietnam. It will go beyond Vietnam.
Yes.
And I think it has. And I guess it brings back that urgency in this moment. This moment is also a time to break silence. And I don't think intellectual activity can remain behind, Yeah. I say this from a very personal place because trying to do science in counter-revolutionary times has a very demoralizing effect on young people. It has had a demoralizing effect on me to the extent of not believing that it's worth anything. Like it's just a job to work in physics or whatever. But it's only like that, and it's only demoralizing when you don't hold yourself to a certain standard. And I think we are demanding that now is the time, now or never, basically, like when else, Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
No, I also think this event is going to be very important. And when I was listening to you read the call, it did make me emotional because, like, I wish I had been able to hear that call 10 years ago when I was first starting college. And I think it's spot on. Like, I think it's very, and I think newer generations will benefit a lot from this, like, type of effort. But yeah, actually, I was also thinking because Mary, Jeremiah, and I were at Penn's campus late last night because there was a somewhat spontaneous protest, like Palestine, like pro-Palestine protest, and it was kind of surprising to me because it was at one of the buildings that is not one of the main buildings of campus, and it's actually a building where I used to go to attend like, literature classes and reading. And yeah, the environment was extremely tense, and also because like Neri and Jeremiah can also describe it, but basically the scene that I walked into was a row of police with like their shields up, and then 6 feet across from them, a row of protesters like standing in opposition to them and chanting. But I actually don't think the majority of protesters there were students. But the reason it made me emotional is because, like, you guys already know this, but Penn and like my formative, like spending the formative years of my life as a student at Penn, like it really impacted me, just in general. And like I still carry a lot of it with me. It's also the start of alumni weekend, like for my class. Like it's the 5-year graduation of my class, and it started last night. So that's also, I think that was also a strategic point of the protest, is that it was beginning on alumni weekend. But the reason it kind of dug into me to see all of that last night is because I wasn't sure that in my life I would basically see the university as the emperor, like the emperor's clothes, like fall off. And I had very mixed feelings because these protesters who are taking over a lot of the campus protests at a place like Penn, they don't understand what we are saying about the university. We're actually able to reach within from the standpoint of like the ruling class itself and continue to like basically unrobe and expose what the university truly is and what it's done and what it does. And to hence, like, to use Baldwin's words, to forge a new morality in this place after completely revealing like the devastation that has been brought. And yeah, I just, I'm a little too emotional right now, but I just think this is very important because I think I felt for a while that, like, it did not surprise me that Penn became a flashpoint, like a political flashpoint somehow, because it was always bound to happen. It must have happened at some point, like because of how anti-human everything it propagates is. And I've already seen that for decades. But only the free school is mounting an appropriate resistance, or I think of an appropriate response to like the beginnings of, you know, like a very concrete flashpoint at this time. I mean, the protesters last night, they couldn't do it. And like a Penn student and I were also talking about this today, but they don't, I think someone else can complete what I'm saying, but they're much too much outside this. And they're also implicated in a way that they don't completely understand. And they can't take up any real responsibility to, like, the crisis of the American university until they can land somewhere in the region of what we're saying. And it is also connected to what you were just saying about the left as well, Tony. What the left cannot see yet, but will urgently need to.
Being performative to the substance.
Yeah, well, I mean, even some of the chants these protesters are saying, which is essentially like, oh, you can't hide, we charge you with genocide. Like, I completely agree, but do you know what it was like to walk through the halls of Fisher Bennett, which you tried to occupy, and to be 19 years old, and like to think that this is where you would learn about them, like so you could change it. And like, can you put yourself in the shoes of the students? Like, every incoming class of students who still feel that way. And that brings a different quality to like, yeah.
Your views?
Yeah. Well, okay, I'm trying to collect my thoughts. Because I think the way that I see it, things are moving really, really fast. And yeah, yesterday was very tense. Basically, I think actually there was a group of students who tried to take over Fisher Bennett Hall and occupy it.
Where's Fisher Bennett?
It's like the English building on 34th and
Right at the corner.
it's like the one with the has like
Yes.
the corner is like cut out. And yeah, they renamed it Rafat Al Hall after Rafat because he was supposed to come for the Palestine Rights Festival last year in the fall, but he couldn't come because he couldn't get a visa. And I think the occupation actually lasted like 10 minutes because they like got into the building and then I think they were trying to secure it, but the police kind of just dragged them right out. And so part of it was that the idea, I think, was that people should come to defend it, but it was always going to be a difficult trade-off, which is how do you keep an operation like that secret enough that the police won't sabotage it or like prevent you from carrying it out in the first place. But then how do you then quickly mobilize enough people to be able to form like a barrier or to be able to actually protect that kind of space? And yeah, like that is a pretty significant challenge for, I think, young people who are pretty like inexperienced with like thinking tactically about it. Like actually a lot of it, I think, is basically at this point like military strategy in a sense.
Yeah.
Which is like, yeah, how do you actually maneuver secretly? How do you physically like carry enough things? How do you like construct a barricade? Which I think is not like a level or like a type of politics that would be expected. And then like amidst that, how do you win the people? How do you develop the ideas, a sense of cohesion, like a sense of unity to make like stay disciplined in the face of like actual attacks, like both by like certain university professors, by administrators, by the president of your school, by people who are threatening to like suspend you, arrest you, like charge you with felonies. And at the same time, how do you, I think, keep your eyes on like the prize, on the actual goal, which is to free Palestine and not succumb to, I guess, the more immature, like youthful impulses of being like, oh, like fuck you, Penn, like fuck all of this. Like because I think those are like there are a lot of obstacles. And I think also in some ways, yeah, the different ideas that people hold, both I think like as a remnant of like all the woke stuff, all the identity politics, like the memory of like George Floyd, the memory of like 2020, 2016, like Occupy, all of that. And like it's a lot of baggage, I think, to carry. And I think for young people who are like 18, early 20s, they don't remember. I don't think they've necessarily processed it because it's just what they've grown up into.
Yeah.
And so in some ways they take it for granted. And I think for older like millennials, that's their blueprint in a way. Like they think that that is the way to actually do struggle. But it hasn't been tested, I think, at such like high stakes and with actual repression. And so it's just very challenging, I think, because things are not moving on the time scale that would be, I think, preferred or advantageous for these students. Where part of it, like I know like part of the logistical things where, yeah, we want to do something in time for alumni weekend. We need to do things before like graduation or before all the undergrads basically leave campus. But then, yeah, there are just so many, I think, odds stacked against them in a way. And but I will say that like since the encampment went down, the atmosphere on campus definitely changed again, where it started to feel not peaceful, but less like things were like definitely less on the surface. Because I think while the encampment was up, like you had to think about Palestine, you had to think about Gaza every single day. And it brought out a different quality in people that I think sort of not died down, but was subdued after it went down. And yeah, I think the question on my mind is how to maintain, like, I think a degree of presence and tension that is productive. Because I was also kind of shocked at how quickly the police converged and how many of them were there, where I think they had to have been on pretty high alert and to have been prepared to like immediately crack down on anything. Because I do think that for most of the other universities, like, they managed to actually like hold most of the buildings, at least for a few hours or a few days. And I think it is like basically a new amount and quality of repression because yeah, like honestly, like the police were pretty scary last night. Like they were holding like their like batons and they looked kind of like just pissed. Like I think it felt even different from the other times that I've seen them. So I don't know. I'm still thinking about it
This is
because
very interesting.
I think basically the way
Can I just say something, Nuri? You're right. See, this indicates what kind of we've all known for some time, that the most powerful institution in the city of Philadelphia is not city council or the mayor's office, the University of Pennsylvania. And therefore, it's not the tail wagging the dog, it's the dog wagging the tail. The tail is city government. And that you're right. And Penn must be protected, meaning it's property, it's buildings at all costs. And they've decided now, like you say, this was different than when they cleared the encampment.
Yeah, like I think they want to basically smash it. Like,
Yes,
smash everything before it can,
absolutely.
I guess, grow.
Can I just say one other thing? And so much is involved. Gentrification. Penn owns so much property in West Philly, not just the bottom, but going all the way to beyond 52nd Street. All of this is involved. What the city will look like under their rule, under their governance, so to speak.
Yeah, because I think the last
I'm sorry to
thing is,
interrupt you.
the last thing is that I think the composition of the protest also looked a little bit different, where it did seem to be fewer students and more, I guess, like what I would call Philly left types. But part of it, I think, was the timing and like the suddenness of it, and the fact that a lot of the undergraduates have moved out. And I think, although I would definitely like to see like a large outpouring of students, or for there to be like a more cohesive mass of students, I think in some ways made me think more about like what is the capacity of, I guess, different types of people or different groups of people to be able to respond in such a way, because the one and only benefit that I can see, I think, to like these leftists who are ready to show up is that, like, even if the reason or like the actual outcome is quite different from like the 2020 like BLM stuff, the thing is that I think it's actually like objectively clear that the police are very different, like with these protests than I think with the previous iterations. And I think, yeah, it draws out a new question of like, why is that the case? And if so, like, yeah, like what are the roles of the different people who can participate in it, and where basically does it have to be? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to point out that, because I think what Michelle and Mary are saying, and then how it relates to also the science conference, is I feel like it's important to view the student protests not as just tactical, but they reflect an ideological struggle that hasn't completely overcome a watershed. Because like these students, I think it's very positive that this handful of students tried to take over the building, even if they only last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That's what you said. The point is not to actually take over the building and for it to be a permanent, like permanent people substitution. That's not the point. The point is to sharpen the contradictions that already exist in the landscape of domestic politics. And it's not even just the students. The students reflect one force that could deepen a divide that needs to be divided, which is the people in the state. And I actually think the largest leap the students have not made yet, but they can, because it's the next step, is to close the gap that has been inflicted by gentrification, and that Penn deliberately has split students from ordinary people, just Black people. I think the biggest leap the students will have to make is that the reason, for example, they could not successfully, the students will always encounter an issue of an even more aware city ruling elite of the city, of police, more agitated, who will be more forceful, Governor Shapiro even. They will not be able to withstand that unless they're actually supported by the Black community. And I actually think what Penn or the mayor of the city, what they fear about Penn being destroyed is they fear for the student or even the activists to actually on principle unite with the Black community who already are pissed off, angry at a city that does not care about them, has pushed them out. Like, I think that is the greatest leap, not just in terms of like unity, but also ideologically, that would be the greatest leap. Is for the students to make the leap to say, this is not me, this is not like a quote unquote, I don't think it is, but it's not an immature, like I'm just rebelling against my university or against my parents. But it's I'm actually upset at what this university stands for. I'm upset at the university as an arm of the state. Like, I'm even willing to go to Chicago to protest Biden at the DNC. And then it's like a certain path that also leads you to basically the people. I think that is the ideological leap the student will have to make. And I also think that's the contribution of both this conference. And I think it's the contribution of like something like Lotus that actually would work through like that central contradiction. And I think that's kind of what I'm observing with the students.
No, because I think what makes the quality of the students different from the quality of like the majority of the Philly left, which is involved in the protests that are happening at Penn, is that they instinctively really take on this question of like, forging a new morality, basically, which is also to say, like, forging a new blueprint for what a new elite university or new American university will look like. And I cannot see this question going away anytime soon because it is such a burning and a compelling and also an existential question for the students. And this is where, like, I do condemn actually the Philly left that involves itself in these protests who take on slogans like FN because like you immediately absolve yourself from the responsibility to actually transform the basis that university. And the point is not to do away with American university. That's asking for a different type of debt. Like it is to transform and to restore what the purpose of education at at an institution like Penn should actually be. Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe I didn't emphasize this enough, but I think I say that to say that this is the quality of the students that I'm hanging on to, and I'm also observing and watching because I have a lot of, also because I was once one of those students, and I think it's, like I just agree completely that that is the precise contribution that an event like this will also make, and I believe it's so timely and like so sharp and so important.
I want to respond to Murray because I'm part of the signal chat for Philly Palestine and JVP. And in the signal chat for Philly Palestine, I heard, this is just a rumor, but I heard that tasers were deployed on the students in the building. So I mean, it's just,
Tasers?
yeah.
They were used, but they were out.
Well,
I don't know if they tasered students, but they had them out.
yeah, all I heard was that tasers were deployed, so it just speaks to like the level of militarization of the Philly police and the Penn police together. And I also noticed that one of the students, or it was a grad student at Columbia, who goes between Philadelphia and Columbia, and they're part of NSJP. So there was at first I wanted to be like, oh, the Philly left, you're so disorganized, you can't even take a building for 10 minutes. But it was a serious attempt at taking a building, but the campus police was already mobilized. There was a direct connection between the Penn encampment or the Penn occupation and Columbia, and NSJP, which just speaks to what you were talking about, like the organization of the students. But I was reflecting on my experience with stadium stompers, and I want to agree with like what Emily said, which was um, the big success behind Stadium Stompers was because it was a coalition of the community. And I think one of the big nails in the coffin for Temple was when I saw Minister Rodney and the Stadium Stompers and the NAACP and Power mobilize 600 community members in Philly to basically tell Daryl Clark, like, we don't want a stadium here. And I think it's a lot more difficult. Like, that's not to say like, oh, well, the Penn left, like the Penn students, they need to do a better job of reaching out to the community, but also it's more difficult for them because they're in University City and the Penn gentrification has been so much more thorough than the Temple University gentrification. The neighborhoods around Temple, around Church of the Advocate, they're protected by historical placards and zoning laws and people like Miss Jackie and Gail Loney. Yeah, so I think, there's still a bit to put on.
No, I agree with you, but what I would say is that at Penn, the Black workers got on campus, where all of the dining workers, all the contractors, all the custodial staff, like service workers, it's all Black people, like from West Philly or from North Philly or from New Jersey. And I think that that is one place for the students to begin to move toward, like in forging like a certain relationship.
Yeah, I also agree with you because it seems like there are, from just viewing the signal communication, it seems like there are groups of different people, like how involved you are. And there's students and student organizers. But there's also the typical like leftist that shows up spontaneously to everything, like has nothing to do all day but attend protests. And some people were more out of the loop than others. I could only do spontaneous actions like chant obscenities at police.
I just think it's important that even what we're saying, it's ideological. Like, I just think that's really important to say because, okay, Temple, like, there's, right, in some ways what you're saying is because Temple is in a Black neighborhood that the people have defended so hard, that Temple students, by being able to possibly interact more with, like, the Black community, or for Temple to feel the pressure of the Black community saying, like, this should be a certain type of education still, because there's so many commuter students, that in some ways that makes the Temple students more conscious. But I guess I wanted to say that, firstly, I think what has to be said is the University of Pennsylvania knew what they were doing by gentrifying that neighborhood. They're not just victimizing or hurting the Black community, they're deliberately doing it for their own students. The students are victims of that gentrification as well. I think that's really important to point out. Like, the students, they're deliberately trying to thwart their own students, to control their own students. They're trying to affect their students to be a certain way, to not access something that would free them. Which is to say that because I just say this, like, we went to Cornell, not a single Black person said. Ithaca, like, it's really just white people, like, it's poor whites. And so there's not the contradiction of the color line, but there's a contradiction of the same poverty that comes from a society that's defined by exploitation, the color line. Like, it affects the white worker just as much. So whatever. So, but I'm just making a point that's ideological, because at Penn, because also at Penn, even if there weren't Black workers, the University of Pennsylvania is in Philadelphia. And those young people, those students, like, what they currently are doing is it's full of consciousness. And it may not be because they ran into a Black person on the street and they're like, oh wow, Black person on the street, like, that reminds me I should, like, take over this building. Like, it has to do with something ideological that maybe they would have gotten more if they actually understood, if they were closer to the Black community. Like, they would have seen more deep contradictions, because it's so overt when it comes to, like, a Black community, a university that doesn't give a shit about the Black community and actually wants to destroy the Black community. But I think that's what's very deep about, it's not Temple, it's not even Drexel, it's the University of Pennsylvania this time. And I actually think it shows something about the quality of those students at the University of Pennsylvania, where despite how much their own university hoped to separate them from the people, they found the Palestinian people. And there's a hope that they will find, like, their own American people, the Black proletariat. And yeah, I just think it's ideological, because I think what's ideological is that being around the Black community, it's not just for you to be like, oh, I love Black people and that's it. It's about, like, what actually changes you as a person? What do you actually learn from the Black African American struggle, or even just, like, from the way Black people live? Like, yes, like, it's ideological. Has it then changed the way you see yourself? Has it changed the responsibility you feel to yourself or what's around you, the city, people, ordinary people? And I think I just want to point that up, because I actually think an issue with the Philly ultra-left, many of whom have roots in Temple actually, is that the issue with the Philly left and ultra-left is that it's almost a little bit of an identity politics fetishizing thing, where they're like, oh, just because I got Black bodies around, I don't have any issues. Like, I'm the real radical, I'm the real revolutionary, rather than it actually being an understanding of what is revolutionary in this country and what would actually free this country. What lessons do I learn from the Black freedom struggle? What ideas, what ideological challenges, what contradictions did the civil rights movement, like, not just sharpen, but open opportunities for? And I just think that's something that's really important. Yeah, and I also say this because, like, I don't know if I should get into it now, and I don't know if we have time for it, but yeah, I went to the Met and I was really impacted by this exhibit on the Harlem Renaissance. And I was really impacted because like when we were talking about the university and what the university should be, like there was no physical structure like a university in Harlem like that. But the university was Black people, the artists, intellectuals, the the attempt at thought and ideas that comes from people engaged in actually thinking of like, who am I? What is this country? What does it ought to be? And that kind of dialectic of a civilization that deserves to die, Western civilization, and then what does it mean to actually begin to produce a civilization that is strong enough to defeat what needs to be a dead civilization? Because that's, I think, what the roots of the Harlem Renaissance were. Because like when you view the art, anyways, at the Met, like the Harlem Renaissance, I was really impacted by all the fact that it was a whole ecosystem of not just painters, but poets, intellectuals. Someone like Du Bois was not seen as an academic separate, but actually very much shaping and immersed with all these poets and artists. Like the artists were not just trying to produce something, what they were trying to do was they were engaged in science, like philosophy. What should a new man look like? Like the whole new Negro movement was not just new Negro, it was new man in becoming, new American in becoming. Like if you have a new Negro, then you can have a new man, a new American. And so it was really deep because I was really moved by this room of Aaron Douglas murals where it was like they put in the work to actually, I've never seen that much Aaron Douglas in one room, all together. Like his painting of From Slavery to Reconstruction, and it was about the emancipation of man. And it was also, it just was really beautiful because philosophically, Aaron Douglas, first of all, he was mentored by a German man who was white, right, who came to America and could not help himself, but he was part of the Harlem Renaissance. He was really interested in only painting Black people. Winnold Rice. He's the one with the really famous portrait of Du Bois, Langston Hughes. And Aaron Douglas was mentored by artists like Winnold Rice, Du Bois, like all the figures of the Harlem Renaissance. But Aaron Douglas, what he did was he had this painting where what he was showing was in the background, you see the Sphinx from Egypt, and you see Buddhist pagodas. And then you see what's supposed to be the Black proletariat, like with the hammer, and there's a crane. And what it's basically showing you is, what does modern mean? Who is the modern man? And the modern man, so the Black proletariat is both ancient. The Black proletariat represents a civilization becoming as ancient in the ways that the Asian civilizations or African civilizations are equivalent, but at the same time, towards something futuristic, like the modern man, the man who claims his own destiny, the man, despite oppression, like finds his way toward freedom. And it kind of just showed me that like this moment in time, and I think it's historically important because the Harlem Renaissance only could happen because of the Great Migration. It was a time after Reconstruction where so many Black people came to the North. What happens when the Southern proletariat, enslaved proletariat, or you could say the peasant, the way we talk about the Chinese peasantry, the revolutionary peasant. What happens when the peasantry from the South comes north? It is now the urban worker. And they're all together. And what happens? It's an explosion of thought, not just for Black people, but on behalf of America, of like, what should the new man be? And I was just really moved, like philosophically, because I actually think that is where there was an epistemological break that forever changed the future of America. And I think people like King benefits from it. Like, it allows an opening of, who am I? What kind of man am I? And I'm actually really into Langston Hughes right now because, like, and I'm also sorry if I disrupted the conversation on Penn because I wasn't sure if like Jeremiah wants to say something, but like this is all related to also the science conference because like I'm really into art and poetry, but I'm also really, I'm really into Langston Hughes. But I guess I'll get into why I was really moved by the exhibit and how I think it relates to the Palestinians also. No, but I really want to read something from Langston. Yeah, I will. But Langston Hughes has this essay called "The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain."
Oh yeah.
And I think Langston Hughes' poetry is beautiful, but there's something about his writing that's like, this is a deep motherfucker. Like he's a really defining person, or I feel that, where he's basically like, he said, one of the most, and he reminds me in some ways as an ancestor of Baldwin. But I think that he is very much a forerunner of Baldwin. But he said, one of the most promising of the young Negro poets said to me once, I want to be a poet, not a Negro poet. Meaning, I believe, I want to write like a white poet. Meaning, subconsciously, I would like to be a white poet. Meaning, behind that, I would like to be white. And I was sorry the young man said that, for no great poet has ever been afraid of being himself. And I doubted then that with his desire to run away spiritually from his race, this boy would ever be a great poet. But this is the mountain standing in the way of any true Negro art in America, this urge within the race toward whiteness, the desire to pour racial individuality into the mold of American standardization, and to be as little Negro and as much American as possible. And he says, for racial culture, the issues, he's talking about the issues of Black people who need to define themselves in order to help define what is a non-existent Americanness. He says, for racial culture, the home of a self-styled high-class Negro has nothing better to offer. Instead, there will perhaps be more aping of things white than in a less cultured or less wealthy home. The father is perhaps a doctor, lawyer, landowner, or politician. He's talking about a Black family. The mother may be a social worker or a teacher, or she may do nothing and have a maid. Father is often dark, but he has usually married the lightest woman he could find. The family attend a fashionable church where a few really colored faces are to be found, and they themselves draw a color line. In the North, they go to white theaters and white movies, and in the South, they have at least 2 cars and house, like white folks. Nordic manners, Nordic faces, Nordic hair, Nordic art, if any, and an Episcopal heaven. A very high mountain indeed for the a very high mountain indeed for the would-be racial artist to climb in order to discover himself and his people. But then there are the low-down folks, the so-called common element, and they are the majority. May the Lord be praised. The people who have their nip of gin on Saturday nights and are not too important to themselves or the community, or too well-fed, or too learned to watch the lazy world go round. They live on 7th Street in Washington, or State Street in Chicago, and they do not particularly care whether they are like white folks or anybody else. Their joy runs, bang, into ecstasy. Their religion soars to a shout. Work maybe a little today, rest a little tomorrow. Play a while, sing a while, oh, let's dance. These common people are not afraid of spirituals, as for a long time their more intellectual brethren were, and jazz was their child. They furnish a wealth of colorful, distinctive material for any artist because they still hold their own individuality in the face of American standardizations. And perhaps these common people will give to the world its truly great Negro artist, the one who is not afraid to be himself. Whereas the better class Negro would tell the artist what to do, the people at least let him alone when he does appear. And they are not ashamed of him. If they know he exists at all, then they accept what beauty is their own without question. And then he says, he says, certainly there is for the American Negro artist who can escape the restrictions the more advanced among his own group would put upon him, a great field of unused material ready for his art, without going outside his race and even among the better classes with their white culture and conscious American manners, but still Negro enough to be different. There is sufficient matter to furnish a Black artist with a lifetime of creative work. And when he chooses to touch on the relations between Negroes and whites in this country, with their innumerable overtones, undertones, surely, and especially for literature and the drama, there is an inexhaustible supply of themes at hand. To these, the Negro artist can give his racial individuality, his heritage of rhythm and warmth, and his incongruous humor that so often, as in the blues, becomes ironic laughter mixed with tears. But let us look again at the mountain. And he says, I just want to read the end. I think it's worth it. He says, the Negro artist works against an undertone, sharp criticism and misunderstanding from his own group, and unintentional bribes from the white. Oh, be respectable, write about nice people, show how good we are, say the Negroes. Be stereotyped, don't go too far, don't shatter our illusions about you, don't amuse us too seriously, we will pay you. say the white. Both would have told Jean Toomer not to write Cain. The colored people did not praise it. The white people did not buy it. Most of the colored people who did read Cain hate it. They are afraid of it. Although the critics gave it good reviews, the public remained indifferent. Yet accepting the work of Du Bois, Cain contains the finest prose written. And he says, most of my own poems are racial in theme and treatment, derived from the life I know. And many of them I try to grasp and hold some of the meanings and rhythms of jazz. I am as sincere as I know how to be in these poems, and yet after every reading, I answer questions like these from my own people. Do you think Negroes should always write about Negroes? I wish you wouldn't read some of your poems to white folks. How do you find anything interesting in a place like a cabaret? Why do you write about Black people? You aren't Black. What makes you do so many jazz poems? But jazz to me is one of the inherent expressions of Negro life in America, the eternal tom-tom beating in the Negro soul, the tom-tom revolt against weariness in a white world, a world of subway trains and work, 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 the tom-tom of joy and laughter and pain swallowed in a smile. Yet the Philadelphia clubwoman is ashamed to say that her race created it, and she does not like me to write about it. She doesn't care for the Wynald Rice portraits of Negroes because they are too Negro. She does not want a true picture of herself from anybody. She wants the artist to flatter her, to make the white world believe that all Negroes are as smug and as near white in soul as she wants to be. But to my mind, it is the duty of the younger Negro artist, if he accepts any duties at all from outsiders, to change through the force of his art that old whispering, I want to be white, hidden in the aspirations of his people. To why should I want to be white? I am a Negro and beautiful. So I am ashamed for the Black poet who says, I want to be a poet, not a Negro, as though his own racial world were not as interesting as any other world. I am ashamed too for the colored artist who runs from the painting of Negro faces to the painting of sunsets, after the manner of the academicians, because he fears the strange unwhiteness of his own features. An artist must be free to choose what he does, certainly, but he must also never be afraid to do what he might choose. Let the blare of Negro jazz bands and the bellowing voice of Bessie Smith singing the blues penetrate the closed ears of the colored, near intellectuals until they listen and perhaps understand. Let Paul Robeson singing Waterboy and Rudolph Fisher writing about the streets of Harlem and Jean Toomer holding the heart of Georgia in his hands, and Aaron Douglas drawing strange Black fantasies because the smug Negro middle class caused the smug Negro middle class to turn from their white, respectable, ordinary books and papers to catch a glimmer of their own beauty. We younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, it doesn't matter. We know we are beautiful and ugly too. The tom-tom cries, the tom-tom laughs. If colored people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, their displeasure doesn't matter either. We build our temples for tomorrow, strong as we know how, when we stand on top of the mountain, free within ourselves. Yeah, and I just want to capture this, what I think is actually a philosophic break. Like, I think Langston Hughes to me is like, it comes from the ordinary person. The way he says that tom-tom of, like, he's like, it is the common people, the ordinary people who don't even care if the artist is with us or not. But they'll let you do, like, they'll let you be there. They'll let you, like, hear the song, feel the spirit. And it's deep because, like, I was in this exhibit and there's just so much, not just beauty, but depth of thought, like depth of science being worked out. Like, who determines the future? Who actually is the modern man? Who is defining and actually producing the civilization in becoming that has the ability to actually destroy what is already a dying civilization, but just hasn't been defeated the last blow? And it's the Black proletariat, and they're doing it on behalf of the American people. If the American people can join within it and see it, which is also why I'm really interested in this German white guy who, like, was really a contemporary of, his work is beautiful. Like, you can look at it. It's a contemporary of, like, all the other artists who all defended him despite people saying, oh, but he's not Black. And they're like, but what he's doing though is he's going deeper and deeper into like the beauty of Black people, and there's something deep within it. But anyways, my point is that I was looking at all this art, and it reminded me of how like I just felt this overwhelming feeling that now in this crisis is the time for poetry and art like this, which is to say now is the time of science, because art and poetry is all science. It's science, it's philosophy, and what it also is it's like an assertion of the philosophy of man, of modernity, of like of what humanity deserves, of like something all encompassing, something that both is totally in vain of like the ancient Buddha in Egypt and the Sphinx and all of that, yet it's something modern and moving forward. And it just reminded me of how like I think because it relates to the student movement, because I really think there's something about like how horrific was happening to the Gazan people and the Palestinian people, that war. It also showed something to, let's say, the students at UPenn or at Columbia that made them want to hold on to something human again, to feel like, to hold. And I think it's also why a lot of young people are obsessed with Palestinian people, but their art and their song and their dance. It's why like you have all these young people who want to know the music of Palestine. And it's because they want to know humanity, they want to hold on to something human, to know that they are also human, to know that I'm still here. And it also showed me that I think if this path could also lead young people in America back to like the blues or like the rhythm and blues, like this music or art in this exhibit, if it could lead them back to like that revolutionary poetry and song and music that is, I think, a compass or the guiding light post of like an assertion of humanity or like a philosophy of humanity, then I think a civilization that's in becoming can be a fulfilled civilization that can finally defeat what must be an old civilization in an old world. And I guess my last point is like this is also built upon like I was really impacted by the exhibit because of preschool last week, because of this thing that actually what's happening in the world, it's all about, everything is about civilization. And I think that's important to say, because I think like you said, every state is defending a civilization. Like every state is defending not just ideology, but a civilization. Every war is actually a civilizational war. And I think there's something really important about identifying the Harlem Renaissance and all that art and poetry and thought and science as the groundings, the beginnings of like it was the beginnings of a civilization becoming. I think it was the big break that produced like the beginnings of a modern civilization. And that's also to say the reason why I think it's time for art and poetry, even if it's going back to rhythm and blues music, let's say, we don't have to create the wheel now, is that I think art and music and poetry in particular are not just reflective of society, but are generative. And that's what you get from the Harlem Renaissance, that it took people making that art, and it took artists to build upon it in order to move, in order to move revolutionary struggle forward. Like it's art and poetry, I think it's generative. I don't think it's actually just reflective. And I just think that's, anyways, I wanted to add that in because, and then just like building on what people are saying, like, what I get also from Langston Hughes is it kind of reminds me of Mao, even though I think the Cultural Revolution had issues with it fucked up, but Langston Hughes, this thing of like a disdain for ordinary Black people is a disdain for ordinary people. What makes them ordinary and the producers of civilization. And I think it's due to an ideological agenda of the ruling elite, which is also to say that white supremacy is ideological. That America does not have a issue with race like that, but it's an ideological struggle against white supremacy, which is to say a modern, almost a more severe form of it today is Zionism. And which is also why I don't think Lenin in and of himself, because of the lack of concept of civilization, cannot explain the crisis, the concrete reality of the crisis, especially in America.
Can I add to what you're saying? I think in this crisis, it's extremely important that for the conference, we're also focusing on knowledge. And because exactly to your point, what you're saying, Emily, is that knowledge is also what leads to civilization, all the different pieces of civilization, whether it's science, whether it's art, whether it's music, poetry. And I've been extremely moved in terms of us even talking about the university and in connection to what was, I think, either presented last week or the week before, where I feel like many of us here who have gone to elite universities never felt like they can go to university and become honest people, like an emphasis on honest people who were seeking an education actually for the betterment of the society rather than as for the betterment of an individual. Instead, you're taught to be a certain kind of individual that cheats and lies within a society that cheats and lies. And so I think even to what Chumbarto was saying earlier, like, yeah, like what are the kinds of individuals that come out of universities? And that being connected to what's happening with the student protest, which is in some way, shape, or form, you go to an elite university, and you're like, this is what it is. Like you end up being a cog, and I mean, I think more and more people are like, oh, I just end up being a cog in the machine, rather than actually an individual, like a human being, like a beautiful human being. And I think this is where we're talking about the crisis of knowledge, and I'm also interested in where we're saying actually is that where do we go from here in capturing knowledge actually for ordinary people, and that as a strategy for freedom, like knowledge and civilization that comes out of it as a strategy for freedom. And what Emily was saying early actually reminds me a lot of what I've been reading, because I feel like I've been kind of soulless lately. So I've been going back to Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk. And the first chapter he has is Of Our Spiritual Strivings. And, you know, even the title itself, Of Our Spiritual Strivings, is when he talks about, you know, Black people who are newly emancipated. And he says, like, it was the slave that had this belief in freedom that was stronger than anyone else in this country. And there's such parallels because parallels in the sense of, like what are the spiritual strivings of students, of ordinary people in this country? Like what are the strivings of America? And that's the conversation why last week was important, which is like strivings also leads to a civilization. What is the imagination of people if they had the power to create that? And so actually, I also want to read a couple of excerpts from Of Our Spiritual Strivings because there's such parallels. And he's talking about, you know, the emancipated Black worker. He's talking about their trying to figure out, okay, we thought, you know, being freed would actually mean freedom, but it became more difficult actually. So whether it was the vote or whether it was something else. And so this is where Du Bois is saying, or the first piece is, this then is the end of his striving, to be a co-worker in the kingdom of culture. And I thought that was so interesting because that's essentially what we're saying, which is to become a co-worker in the kingdom of civilization, to create something new, to escape both death and isolation, which is that the predicament of the students that I see today, to husband and use his best powers and his latent genius. These powers of body and mind have in the past been strangely wasted, dispersed, or forgotten. Through history, the powers of single Black men flash here and there like falling stars and die sometimes before the world has rightly gauged their brightness. And I think that's like what we're trying to do with free school too, which is, you know, individuals like King, Du Bois, Baldwin, the world has not recognized their greatness yet. Let's see. Then actually this piece is connected to Emily, what you were saying, which is like the double consciousness of the Black individual in the society, where so this double consciousness where he says the innate love of harmony and beauty that set the ruder souls of his people a dancing. So it's ordinary people, dancing and a singing raised but confusion and doubt in the soul of the Black artist. For the beauty revealed to him was the sole beauty of a race which his larger audience despised, the larger audience being the white world. And he could not articulate the message of another people. This waste of double aim, this seeking to satisfy two unreconciled ideals, has wrought sad havoc with the courage and faith and deeds of 10,000 people, has sent them often wooing false gods and invoking false means of salvation, and at times has even seemed about to make them ashamed of themselves. But then, so that is where Du Bois talks about art and the Black artists. Then he also talks about essentially intellectuals or even ordinary people striving for an education that they were denied in the past. He says, 1 million Black men started with renewed zeal to vote themselves into the kingdom. So the decade flew away, the revolution of 1876 came, and left the half-free serf weary, wondering, but still inspired. Slowly but steadily in the following years, a new vision began gradually to replace the dream of political power.
Right.
A powerful movement, the rise of another ideal to guide the unguided, another pillar of fire by night after a clouded day. Anyways, he's so beautiful. I forgot of spiritual strivings. It's just so beautiful. It was the ideal of book learning, the curiosity born of compulsory ignorance, to know and test the power of the Kabbalistic letters of the white man, the longing to know. Here at last seemed to have been discovered the mountain path to Canaan, longer than the highway of emancipation and law, steep and rugged, but straight, leading to heights high enough to overlook life. Up the new path, the advance guard toiled, slowly, heavily, doggedly. And he's saying advance guard, meaning those who are seeking knowledge, a knowledge of understanding the conditions of their oppression, and also strategy and way out. Only those who have watched and guided the faltering feet, the misty minds, the dull understandings of the dark pupils of these schools know how faithfully, how piteously this people strove to learn. It was weary work. The cold statistician wrote down the inches of progress here and there, noted also where here and there a foot had slipped or someone had fallen. To the tired climbers, those who were seeking knowledge, the horizon was ever dark. The mists were often cold. The Canaan was always dim and far away. If, however, the vistas disclosed as yet no goal, no resting place, little but flattery and criticism, the journey at least gave leisure for reflection and self-examination. It changed the child of emancipation to the youth with dawning consciousness, self-realization, self-respect. In those somber forests of his striving, his own soul rose before him, and he saw himself, darkly as through a veil. And yet he saw in himself some faint revelation of his power, of his mission. And it also reminds me of these students, right? For the first time, they're questioning, probably maybe for the first time, they're questioning the purpose of their lives. That self-realization, self-confidence. And yeah, I think what Du Bois is saying here reminds me of that. And he says, and Du Bois is talking about Black folk who are coming out of emancipation, and he continues, and yet he saw in himself some faint revelation of his power, of his mission.
Yeah.
He began to have a dim feeling that to attain his place in the world, he must be himself and not another. For the first time, he sought to analyze the burden bore upon his back, that dead weight of social degradation partially masked behind a half-named Negro problem. He felt his poverty, without a cent, without a home, without land, tools, or savings. He had entered into competition with rich, landed, skilled neighbors. To be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the very bottom of hardships. He felt the weight of his ignorance, not simply of letters, but of life, of business, of the humanities. The accumulated sloth and shirking and awkwardness of decades and centuries shackled his hands and feet. Nor was his burden all poverty and ignorance. the red stain of bastardry, which 2 centuries of systematic legal defilement of Negro women had stamped upon his race, meant not only the loss of ancient African chastity, but also the hereditary weight of a massive corruption from white adulterers, threatening almost the obliteration of the Negro home.
Yeah.
But this is the last piece, which is actually, I think that's yeah, I think this is really we're focusing on there's knowledge is in the title, but I think the broader question is also civilization, a civilization of peace, of science, of human beings. Like, are we going to be honest and brilliant individual or human beings that are able to reach their potential, or is it that we create individuals in the society that are geared towards war? And behind the question of civilization is also that question of the state, because I think people ask this question of the state, but they forget the component of civilization, which is our conversation from last week. And even Du Bois is saying in these excerpts, which is that is the long, hard task of building and becoming co-workers in this kingdom of culture.
Yes.
But I'm really excited. Yeah.
Wait, because when we started preschool today, my heart was heavy for obvious reasons, but this conversation has given me a new wind and I feel excited. Well, I don't think what I'm going to say is new. I think it's a continuation of what Emily and Alice were also saying. But I guess one thing that I hope comes out through this conference also very concretely is that ideas actually come from the people. They don't come from the university, and they don't come because intellectuals, theorize it. So putting theory before the human being leads to this idea of knowledge and science as something that can exist in its own bubble and have no consequences, not mean anything. Knowledge for knowledge's own sake, And this relates to what Emily was saying about poetry, art, all of this also not being separate from science and whatever. And the impulse to separate them is also the impulse to make knowledge separate from the human being, because poetry, art, science, knowledge, everything comes out of the human need to understand what the world is and to articulate that so that you can become by that process more human in a way. And then I was also thinking about the question, related to the student movement, but also in general related to the question of knowledge of social change or knowledge related to social change or moving towards civilization, is this question of what constitutes revolution is an unanswered question, where the left or the this formulation or this, like Shambhata was saying, this dogmatic belief that the only revolution that's possible is the defeat of capitalism and the establishment of a socialist form of government or the economy. I think these questions have been superseded by what Doc formulated as all humanity questions, where the central demand is really peace. The central demand is the human path to self-determination and understanding itself more deeply. And what I'm trying to say is also that this question of how do you identify a revolutionary or what makes a revolutionary, because this is important. This, without addressing this question, is not addressing this question is why Du Bois, King, Baldwin, they're sort of relegated to culture or religion or anything but the realm of revolutionary thought.
This is very
And what I'm also understanding is that a revolutionary movement comes from a concrete demand that comes from the people. Like every revolution is basically rooted in a demand that comes from the people. It's not the other way around. It's not because you have a revolutionary theory that you have revolution. You have revolution because the people need something. The times demand a change. The times demand a transformation. And so if you keep that, if this is your touchstone to understand what constitutes a revolutionary movement, then it allows us to understand who the revolutionary is. It is really those thinkers, those philosophers, those artists, poets who are most closely rooted in the people, who considered their job to be the articulation of this universal human striving, like Baldwin, like King, like Du Bois, And yeah, I mean, just to end that thought, this is also why, I agree with what everybody, Emily and Michelle, you guys were saying about the student movement, is that despite contradictions and weaknesses, what they have really done is made a moral choice. They've made a moral choice, and I think that is the most important thing for, an assessment of whether this is revolutionary or not. That decision that makes it revolutionary. And yes, the contradictions are a part of American history. They come because of the silence that was imposed with the betrayal of the Black Freedom Movement, with the assassination of King. It comes from there. It comes from there. It has benefited a lot of people in, living a certain kind of decadent, safe life. But now, now basically the facade, there's a crack in the facade. You can't carry on. It can't be business as usual anymore. But I've lost the train of my thoughts, so I would stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add to what people were saying, where I think to go back to also, like the student movement, also movement in general, I feel like something that is very clear because we're living through it is that, like the movement is a moving, living thing because it's made up of human beings. And I feel like this is like, like the civil rights movement, I feel like we have talked about it and we've like learned about it and heard about it from people like Dog. And I feel like in a lot of ways, like the Black Freedom movement has become part of like our life world, in part because of where we live. But I think this is, like for me at least, it feels like one of these really pivotal times when like we're also caught up in basically like a sea like of a movement, and it's not exactly clear where it's going to go, but it's clear that it is moving and it's changing. And because like that's because all movements are human beings and human beings are and I feel like like even to like last night, I think that like it's always true that there will be people who are essentially self-satisfied and are opportunists and are not really open to anything because they feel like, or they think that they've already figured everything out and they're just there to basically like tell other people what to do, like speaking of the left. But I think it's also true that I don't know if the people who came to basically like protests after the occupation was basically wiped out by the police. I don't know if all of them are strictly just the Philly left or if it's also just like a broader section of like younger-ish people who like are obviously have a lot of baggage and are very confused, but are essentially still answering like a deeper call and a mandate that they cannot any longer avoid. And yeah, I feel like there will be like definitely like activist types that I feel like I'll see like in you'd see like Nate Getman and stuff. But there's also just like random people that you see showing up like consistently. And you're not sure where they come from, like what their background is. Like a lot of times it's like, like white people, like younger-ish white people. And they also different backgrounds. You're not really sure. Like it is really interesting to see like who continues to come to basically like answer the call, especially when it's like, oh, like on social media there'll be calls put up like, oh, flood pen for Palestine, especially like last night with the 10-minute takeover of the hall. But yeah, I think this is just affirming what other people are saying, but I think part of what the teach-in that Nuri, Catherine, and Doc led like last week did last week? I don't even know. Who knows? Last week, but I think that confirmed that whether you're a student or even if you're just a younger person, as long as you're not basically too corrupted by like certain ideologies, that there is a hunger and a thirst for knowledge. And I think that stretches from the students, but also like younger people in general who like maybe just graduated from college and feel themselves connected instinctively and intrinsically to what's happening on these college campuses, like people like me, I guess. And yeah, I think that like even something I was thinking about like last night was even if like Rafal or your call only lasts for 10 minutes, I think that and I feel like people are already doing this, but yeah, like even failures are constructive, you know? And I feel like King, for instance, would talk a lot about like the failures in places like Albany, Georgia, for instance, and why the movement wasn't able to succeed in certain cities, and they used those lessons and applied them for future campaigns. And yeah, so those are just like general thoughts that I've been having, also with regards to like our conversation. But I think also going into like the science conference, I think yeah, it's very clear that we are essentially trying to take up the responsibility of grappling with burning and essential questions for this time, and not just like sideshow questions, but actually like the substance of like what is needed. Because yeah, I think like this question of science is something that we've been talking about for a long time, especially with like the Winston conference. But like the way that I understand it is, yeah, like what is a science and a knowledge framework that can actually approach first the reality of the American crisis, but also to reach for the way forward. And I think related to that, like I think questions that I guess we'll get into at the conference, it seems like, are like, what does a general theory mean in the first place? And what is what is a special theory? And if we're proposing essentially a Du Boisian, Baldwinian, Kingian science, then what is the relationship of that body of thought to like other revolutionary traditions like Marxism, especially? Because I think like part of what is to me a little bit intimidating about the task that we're undertaking is that Marxism comes with it a very clear, almost framework and a clear also historiography to it, where it's like, Marxism emerges out of the capitalist epoch, you know, especially in Europe. But like, what we're not, part of my understanding, or at least what I think, is that we're not proposing that like the capitalist epoch has been overcome, therefore we need a new theory. That's not the point. But what we are, I think we're saying is that like we are in some ways addressing a need for a more concrete framework for grasping essentially like the dialectic, the motion, and logic of first American history, but also human history broadly. And this is essentially like a knowledge framework which absorbs the logic of class relations and of like modes and stages of production, but is essentially reaching for what is like a broader and complex logic, which is civilization. At least that's kind of how I'm trying to process what we're doing. And so like if we take that as kind of, at least that's like kind of what I'm understanding.
Yeah.
Initially, it's like if we're also saying that there must be a transition in America, particularly, then that new stage of history will be essentially, yeah, what we're saying, a transition to a new civilization, which includes new forms of economic relations, but also requires more fundamental reorientation of people and all areas and all arenas of social relations and social life in the people's consciousness. And yeah, I was just like also thinking about how, because recently I was traveling for work in the state of Washington, like close to Portland, so like just across the road from Portland, and I was thinking about, yeah, like what about all those vast parts of the country which don't have that many Black people, you know? And I think that is in some ways a question that will have to be answered actually like by just people wherever they are. But something I was thinking about was the settling of the American West was basically driven by like the Civil War, to my understanding, or large parts of the settling of the American West was driven by the Civil War and driven by basically the wreckage of what happened on the eastern part of the country during like eastern and southern parts of the country with regards to basically the contradiction of slavery. And Du Bois talks about even to like the free like Western states during the Civil War, like so much of what was driving them was the search for like free labor, like land for free labor as opposed to not land which is dominated by like the state. So that's something I was thinking about. And then also like other questions that I feel like I've been thinking about too, like that we've been talking about is like how do we define Zionism in Israel as a Nazi regime? Because I think my preconception of Nazism was that it was a form of fascism, I guess. And I'm still trying to understand like what distinguishes them. Is it in part the actual state form of like a Nazi regime, but also it seems like part of what we're talking about is like the particular form of the ideology that basically consumes it, and the genocidal mission of that state, which kind of characterizes uniquely like a Nazi state, even more so than a fascist state. So that's something interesting. And then also, I feel like something I've been seeing on social media a lot is this question of like there's been controversy, I think, around whether Zionism is a white supremacist ideology or whether it's simply a Jewish supremacist ideology. And related to that, is Zionism simply a foreign ideology, or is it actually something which is part and parcel of basically the broader ideology of American imperialism? And I feel like those are also important questions because I think there's one way to frame the influence of Zionism in American universities as simply a foreign ideology which is controlling American universities. I don't think that's what we're saying. But we're saying that Zionism is actually one wing, one manifestation of a broader ideology of basically the American ruling class, but it takes a particularly vicious form.
Right.
And so I feel like these are all questions that I think many people are trying to grapple with because part of what I feel like is also, like the underlying dynamics of even like the whole war in Gaza and the genocide is like, oh, like I think a lot of people on face value are like, oh, why is America doing the bidding of a foreign government? When I feel like that's like one way to put it, but that's not actually what's happening. Yeah, it's the same interconnected state.
Yeah.
But people don't understand that because like part of what's hard to understand is that America is an imperialist state. It's not just a domestic state.
Right. Or another saying it, well, because this is something I was thinking about because that New York Times article, which is, you know how people will always a predominant assumption is that what Israel's doing to Palestine is colonialism.
Right.
And so people will relate Israel to America by saying America and Israel are both settler colonial states.
Right.
So that, and we believe in indigenous rights, indigenous Palestinians,
Right.
and then indigenous people in America, whatever that means. But actually, I think it's not. I don't think it's colonialism. I actually think even if what Israel originally did was, you could say, technically colonialism, maybe to say, it's not. It's a reflection of actually an imperialist system. It's like based upon a common ideology of the interconnectedness between like a fake democracy, a democracy, the contradictions of a democracy founded upon white supremacy. Because the thing about in the New York Times article that was really interesting that I haven't thought through enough is that they kept referring to the fact that it is exactly what Israel's doing to Palestine and how it impacts even the Israeli people within Israel that causes a democracy to be so corrupt that is irreparable. And the only way out of that like deep contradiction now is for there to be no two states at all, essentially. That what Israel did was by occupying Palestine and creating a whole ideology and culture around it, that lawlessness becomes the law. That what they did, how I read it was, I was like, you've essentially done the ironic thing, which is you've forever intertwined your future with the future of the people you're oppressing. Meaning that in some ways it's similar to America, not that different, where it's like there can be no argument for two states. I don't know. There's something about that. There's no argument. You've inherently almost created a future where there cannot be an Israel state anymore. There will only be one state where Israelis must have a relationship. Because you forever bonded your own identity. Because now at this point you've bonded not only just your assumptions of democracy upon the subjugation of other people, but you've also essentially bonded your own assumption of who you are to the oppression of another people.
But can I just
Yeah.
intervene? This is very important. First of all, Zionism began in Poland in the 1890s or thereabouts. But what we're talking about now is very different because we're not talking about Polish Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. We're now talking about among the most powerful, wealthiest people in the world, who are the engine of Zionism. So it's transformed, and it transformed from an eclectic movement where you had both nationalists and socialists, and even after World War II, where people who said we'd have a binational state looked upon the socialist among Jews and the socialist among Zionists to move the political situation to the left. But it was captured by the nationalists Zionism, by the nationalists who have now evolved in sync with the evolution of the US state. So you can't separate two states. Zionism as a movement, Zionism as a state, Zionism is not any longer a Eastern European, Warsaw ghettoized people's movement, mainly having a lot of cultural nationalist things, into a state and a powerful state and a military state that is itself almost indistinguishable. I'll put it this way. The distance between the US state and the Israeli state is so small as to make it almost indistinguishable. This is, it's hard to, I mean, I can't, I'm trying to see it as it would look. But, the question I think Jeremiah is putting on the table as well, and the call puts on the table, what is the difference between the Israeli state and the US state? Are they just a single state? And then when you add the concept of a civilizational state, and that's why, we went back to Samuel P. Huntington, the clash of civilizations, where Israel is a central cog along with the United States in the clash of civilization, not just but the war against civilizations. Now, he doesn't say it, but I take as a fundamental assumption that the Israeli American state is a civilization state, waging war against civilization states, which are not as well formed, as well armed, and so on, as the Israeli US state. And you can almost speak of the two as indistinguishable. In other words, when Biden goes there and embraces Netanyahu and then sends every kind of weapon they need, is he defending Israel or is he defending the US state? Or can you must your defense of one by nature be the defense of the other? You know what I'm saying? So I think the concept of civilization state helps us, to see the interconnection. But the other thing is Zionism of today is not what started in Poland, in the 1890s or thereabouts. There is something different happening here. The other thing is, and this is a question that we have to think about, and we need not answer it now or even at the conference, but it'll be beautiful if we can answer it. Is there a logic to capitalist democracy called bourgeois democracy or Western democracy that kind of, if not halted, leads to fascism or Nazism? Is genocide a part of the whole thing? Because if you think about it, this thing in Gaza, they have normalized genocide to the extent that they don't feel a fucking thing. That's why, you listen to the lawyer from South Africa, and she's trying to hold herself from breaking down. How can you do this to mothers and children? And normalize it. That is the key, the normalization of that. And this is where the moral imperative, which ultimately, and you write about, there's so many questions. This is pregnant with all kinds of questions. What is a revolutionary? What defines it at this time? I'm not talking about in the 1800s or the early 20s. What defines it at this time of human development? You know what I'm saying? But the other thing is, and this is why, we're working through this. We talk about this in our writing of the call and thinking, categorical thinking through categories. Great advance, but many problems. See, once you get committed to categories, in other words, as you said, the working class. You have, Sean Fain, the head of the Teamsters, they'll default to that all the time. To, mean I have no moral responsibility, because of the categorical, as opposed to the concrete. And when you read Du Bois or as you did Hours from the Souls of Black Folk, you write the way you first of all, every movement for freedom is defined by its spiritual aspiration. I guess I'm waiting for you to write the article on the spiritual aspirations of the student. And that's what you were just saying. Organic to a student movement. Don't come in here trying to take over the student movement or tell the student, well, go to a small town and talk to white people. I mean, well, okay, that's a beautiful thing. But the organic nature and the organic relationship of students to this huge, powerful institution. But what Du Bois and Baldwin and King and all them, this is why it's so significant. They identified the agent of revolutionary change, not just the category of revolution. You see what I'm saying? I know, having myself, this is my own experience. They said, Tony, you got it. Look, I was in this communist for all these years. I got a resume, so to speak. It's almost Kantian in the search for the pure categories. And so you see it among left intellectuals. The debate is over who understands the categories better, the categories of revolutionary theory, not pull as you said, the agent of revolution. So we can argue day and night, even get into fist fights. I've gotten into that. Over the question of who best understands the categories of revolutionary change, not the agency of the subject of revolutionary change. Now, of course, we do need categories, but once one is complete, remember we were talking about this, because I think I saw with Sambarta, and I said, no, Baldwin is not he does not think through categories. That's rationalism. You said, go. I'm sorry.
No, because you asked me earlier, like what I was talking about during the Thursday reading group about language, and I answered thinking about how different civilizations also produce language, and when they do, they come also in from different, meaning depending on where complex structure and arrangements of trying to think through ideas, right? But that's not the question. That's no, hold on, hold on. No, because wait, because actually I answered
Yes.
a question you didn't ask. The question that you asked was what was
I mean, today on Thursday.
today,
Okay.
this morning. And so basically, when you had asked me about like what I meant that language also is ideological, what I was saying was that language is dependent on that value system, that if a language is based upon freedom, then your entire edifice of what you speak from, to, and are about. No, meaning is okay.
No, I'm just thinking, no, don't get
No, but
we're gonna end up throwing hands in a minute. Yes, you did.
okay.
Go ahead.
But no, because all right. So if the language is dependent on white supremacy, right? Then the entire worldview, the entire like way that you speak
That's right.
is dependent on certain values and arrangements about the world and how you see yourself in it. The language based on freedom, the language based on like struggle, like this historical prophetic struggle, is a different language. And the other thing I was thinking about is this thing about ideology, which is what you're saying.
Which I was asking.
No, you asked the question what I said about language.
Go ahead.
The only reason why I say the thing about ideology is because ideology is actually a set of beliefs. Like, right?
Go ahead.
No, I mean,
No, I wouldn't use the definition of ideology.
What would you use?
Well, I would take the 19th century, the Hegelian Marxist definition. Ideology is a worldview.
Right.
You know, okay, you could then out of that set beliefs with Mike Flow, yes.
Well, the thing about the worldview is important. I'm not trying to, I just re-looked it up on Google because I was like, what is ideology?
I understand.
Meaning that's also, okay, the reason why I bring that up is to say, like, I feel like I'm talking around the nature of what Emily you're pointing out, like the modern, the new, and how that is also achieved. Like you had already said, Doc, through the subject, like the subject of history.
Yes.
Right.
In the sub. Can I just continue? See, we're going back to Thursday's reading group at the Free Library. And we were reading this essay by Baldwin, Take Me to the Water. And just his sentences.
Right.
There have never been, or no, I can't say that. But certainly you don't see those sentences anywhere in modern writing, in current American writing, certainly. So Serafina made certain formulations, but that I was trying to remember in a conversation with another person who was trying to relay what she said, and I could not get it. And I think in part is what you're saying, that ideology bends language and syntax and grammar in a certain way. And now I got what because you were saying, because you compared Baldwin's sentences to painting. Remember that? And I'm just, because we were going so fast, I couldn't get it all in my head. But then you made this extraordinary observation that if freedom is the object of the writer or the painter, language and syntax and grammar looks differently or functions differently. Remember?
Right,
Mhm,
right.
mhm, mhm. Now, if I just say one more, but you go.
No,
I was just going to go back to thinking through categories
okay.
that I think fits into what you're saying, because in a certain way, here we're back to Noam Chomsky, because Chomsky thinks about language and grammars and all of that through categories. You know, Chomsky is the quintessential rationalist. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not hating at all, but I'm appreciating. However, that is not the end of the story, or because then where does the human come into this? And I don't know that for Chomsky, questions like the ones that you raise are present. You know what I'm saying? I can't say they're not. Maybe if somewhere in some of his writings or lectures, they are there. But certainly he does not do what Baldwin is, what you were explaining.
It made me reflect about actually when you think in terms of the human and think in terms of the worldview or the ideology, then everything becomes really sensitive. Like I was thinking about how when you grow up, like even Michelle, like when you brought up being a student, like it's even the same as when you go through a certain period of time and you think, well, what am I going to be? Like, who am I supposed to become? How do I get there? That all also doesn't really particularly end, meaning like, say, every maybe day, you probably would have to think of different moral decisions of how you like think through life. Like what is real depends on.
See, and this is a very important point. Therefore, the categorical or thinking categorically does not answer the question of how do I live?
And who do you?
Yeah, that's right. And that is what, if you read, just like Alice was reading that first chapter of Souls, it is colliding with the rationalist way of thinking. For example, most Marxists today could not think in Du Boisian or Baldwinian terms. You just can't, because the thought is predicated upon a certain method of thought, which is rationalist thinking, which is categorical thinking through categories: the working class, the capitalist class, mode of production, social relations of production. And therefore, what categorical thinking through categories as an advancement gave us is that it freed thinking from, I'm going to say, metaphysics. This idea of non-rational, hence non-scientific modes of thought. So most science thinks through categories. And that's why, like I learned this from Purim and Bartok, that physics is mainly about theory.
Right.
And that if you want to do physics, you have to become, because I'm always confused. I say, are you a physicist or a biologist? Well, it's a hard, or chemist. Yeah, he said, well, it's a hard thing to define. The same with Raju. They're physicists, but to do concrete work or concrete experiment.
I add that to the list.
Yeah, but I just say all of that to say that, and this is Pulba, I agree completely with the way you have approached the question, at least to put the question on the table. What constitutes revolution? What constitutes a pre-revolutionary condition? And from whence will come the revolutionary, well, we can use vanguard in society. And how is it connected to the state? And this is why I think the civilization state is so important. Because, yeah, I just, oh, and I'm
Well,
sorry.
that's the thing about the language aspect, though.
Mhm,
Like the thing
mhm.
about,
Mhm.
like, it doesn't really particularly matter the language
Uh-huh.
in the sense that it matters the ideology of the worldview.
This is so interesting. I'm sorry.
Yeah, in
I
which the
think
language
it's
is
so
used.
interesting
Because when
the way
you talk the relationship between the civilization state of Israel and the United States, they're almost inseparable. Well, it's also about the white supremacist framework that they're both functioning in as inseparable. And
Yeah. These interconnections at this time in history are very important to understand and how we get to understand how we get to them. Could I just say one small thing? And we'll go into
no, I don't understand anything that.
we're in the same reading group at the free library. With Emily. But
I don't know.
beautiful. But you know, a lot is made or said, a lot has been said about the New York Times, CNN, Philadelphia Inquirer poll, which showed the obvious that Trump is leading in most of the swing states, the battleground states. You know, okay, we knew this, we saw this before, but I think deep embedded in the in the questioning is that 70% of the American people, tell me if I got it right, Jerry, said that they either wanted significant change in the state, in the political and economic system, or a whole new one. Is that, did I say that? Yeah, 70%. Now, this goes along with the 25% in other polls that said that they would support violence to overthrow the current government. And then today in the New York Times, there's an article about Philadelphia. Well, they don't want to tell the whole truth about Philadelphia.
Right.
And will Black people vote for Biden? Well, we've been talking about this how long? But I think the key thing here, and I think we see it, I mean, I get it from Emily, I get it from everybody, you know, our day-to-day experience, that Black people, Black working people are the most alienated, most separated from the regime, and are probably high up among those who are saying they want basic change in the political and economic system. One time, you know, we called it the triad of opposition. Now that triad got really weak, funky,
Super weak.
but yeah. But at any rate, you know, you say, well, why are they going with Trump? Well, they're going with Trump because Trump is the closest thing to the outsider. All of the major institutions, politically and otherwise, are with Biden. You know, so I would just I think this is all connected. The student movement, which heightened the visibility of everything, and you know, like they always say, oh, people don't care about foreign policy. Well, now it turns out that among the things shaping the opinions of people towards the state and the ruling elite is what's going on in Gaza.
Right.
And they say it without kind of saying it clearly enough that Black people and young people and Hispanic people are abandoning Biden, and part of it is Gaza. They don't know how to frame it, but and this is what I refer to as the moral imperative. And this is why the labor leadership is in such disarray and crisis. because they're trying to make an economic reason to support Biden when the working people are saying we want a moral reason, and there is no adequate moral reason to support him. And there's a whole list of reasons. Then there is the article. Hey Jerry, where did this in the Patriot something?
Oh yeah, this guy's Substack who is doing like analysis of the New York Times called is Rui Texan.
And not Ruby Texer, I think the other
The
one.
liberal patriot one?
Yeah, but I would go in, but there's another, I think another guy that wrote that only one time in modern history has a president won election without winning the majority of workers. And that was Biden in 2020. But now what the data is showing, as this guy teased it out, is, what was that?
Ruby Texan. The working class size hole in Democratic.
That's right. That the majority of working people are against Biden. I mean, this is huge shit. So if you're in the name of a working class with this bum, you are separating working people from the moral imperatives of their, economics, inflation, immigration, and all of that. But then I think, especially when you look at the data on Black people, what tips them away from Biden ultimately is Gaza. This is highly significant, And I think it relates to the question that we'll try to deal with in the science conference, the mode of thought. Categorical thinking in itself is not science, it is scientific only in a certain narrow way. It does not explore the completeness of science, hence what you're talking about, Emily. Art and this form of creativity is also scientific. And without it, science cannot discover its anchorage in the human, not just in the rational, not just in the categorical. What makes me a smart guy? I can think rationally. Oh, I can do mathematics better than anybody else. Oh, you can't do mathematics. You paint because you're not smart enough to do calculus. You know what I'm saying? And then nobody ever thought the teacher can't teach and don't want to teach it. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, you see what I'm saying? This is hugely, and so we are connected. We are connecting dots that look to a future in a new way, a new kind of science, a new kind of thinking. If I can't wait for Raju and Nandita to get here.
Oh my God.
Science from India. Oh, yeah, go.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask something. I don't know fully if it's related to, what we're talking about right now, about, the question of the insufficiency of the categorical in science. But I was thinking about it before, like when you were talking about, actually when Jeremiah was talking about the Marxism emerging as a revolutionary thought theory, and the science of Marxism comes as, it's the categorical thinking of capitalism as the mode of production, and then like connecting it to the white supremacist world system. And the reason that America has a unique history is because it had a unique situation where it had its slaves within its borders, which is why you produce this necessity that you have to understand, the humanity, the humanity of darker humanity, and yet you have to deny what you know to be true.
Absolutely.
This is I'm thinking, that this is something. I mean, it seems beyond the question of a category of understanding what the consequences of what the consequences of white supremacy is, or even or even how capitalism leads to the Western world order. This is something else. This is about a fundamental, human question. What happens to the human being when we have the necessity of denying what we know to be true?
Let me just ask, let me put it another way. Can the category, the working class, let us say, can it do more to obscure
Right.
than to illuminate? In other words, the category, let us say, the working class, erases in certain ways the Black worker.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And for us, for instance, we use the category the Black proletariat. This is very interesting. It's related to Jerry's thing, the general and the special. Is the category the Black proletariat a specific, a special, or is it the general that explains more than itself? And how, we have to work it out. It's not, I don't know that I got it. But I believe that the weakness is in the method of thought, the categorical, rational method. And Marx, as with Hegel, built upon the science of their time. You know what I'm saying? Nothing wrong with it. But it is not the end of the story. And especially for now. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I just wanted to add two things. I don't know if these are right, but I'll say it anyway. Where the first thing, what you were saying about the category of the working class obscuring the Black worker. I mean, what this made me think of is like the misunderstanding that capitalism could ever be separate from racism or white supremacy. They're not separable that way. One was like the entire structure was built.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it only is separable if you think about it in terms of pure categories.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
So that obscuring of the enslaved proletariat by this like sort of blanket category of the working class, I think it
the general category.
Okay, yes. The general category of the working class obscures the intrinsic relation between capitalism and white supremacy.
Or capitalism and the Black worker.
And the Black
And see, that's the great achievement of Black Reconstruction. Not that it solved every problem, but where does it start? The Black worker. And how does he define the Black worker? He says on the first page, the Black worker, the slave, was everything. Well, that's a civilizational category, but also it is a humanization of the Black worker. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
We could say more about that, but yeah.
Well, no, I just wanted to like along the lines of what you're saying, the Black worker as not just like an economic category, but a civilizational category is important because the civilizational category has to do with what was done to the human being when these people, when I don't know, I don't want to say a number, but they were enslaved, was also their humanity being taken away from them, their family being taken away from them, their right to self-determination, to basically define
now, let me just counter. So someone would say, well, look, yes, that is all true. But what was the function or purpose of taking all of that away from them? They would say, well, to produce wealth. Well, that's not untrue. That is true. However, then there are other questions that arise in the mix. Because if you then say, okay, to produce wealth, or some would say the primary wealth for capitalism, okay, super exploited, no, yada, yada, yada. However, the next question, which is the Baldwinian paradox, but what did it do to white people? What did it do to the white worker? Okay, so yes, if let's say I'm going to do Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Karl Marx, political economy. Okay. Question of political economy is, where does wealth come from? Smith and Marx were kind of close on agreement. It comes from labor. Well, what is the process by which labor produces wealth? Marx discovered it, an equation. Well, yeah, that is true, but then that is not the totality. The question, and this is Baldwin's paradox. What did it do to society or civilization? And this is Serafina's point, that at the end of the day, grammars, vocabularies, syntaxes, all of that, sentences, is either freed or contained by the civilizational assumptions the writer has. I know that didn't make sense, didn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So all of this is connected in a kind of dynamic, dialectical, historical, civilizational. All of this has to be connected to understand precisely the question that you put on the table. What is a revolution in this time? What constitutes revolutionary theory? What is a strategy for revolution at this time, and more specifically in the United States? And is what was previously considered to be the general theory, has it now been displaced by what was considered a special theory? And has the special theory become a more complete theorizing? And hence, when we do the conference, the Baldwin Du Bois synthesis, that region of thought, what will that produce?
I'm
sorry.
sorry. This is just making me think a lot because Baldwin sort of, when you bring Baldwin into the mix of categories, his
Why a mix of categories?
I'm coming.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I think his assertion was, because I'm thinking about it this way, his assertion was that the category of Black people was an invention by white people. Now, if you put that into Du Bois's formulation, like he always meant to humanize, as you said, to humanize the category. But when
that's right. Okay, I'm sorry.
But then, I'm still thinking about this. But because it is true that when the slaves were brought here from Africa, that is when there was this divide. You had this enslaved proletariat. Du Bois said that this is the category, this is the of the Black proletariat, and they are, as you said, everything African.
Let me make a suggestion. I don't mean to interrupt. See, when one thinks categorically, one thinks generally in pure categories. For instance, the working class as a category, even as developed, let's say, in Marx's Das Kapital, or in the Communist Manifesto, or as they try to discover the proletariat in historical writings, such as the Civil War in France, and other historical. But it was their effort to historically substantiate the general category, the worker. You see what I'm saying? Now, I contend that Du Bois makes a radical change, because what he does not see the Black worker as a category, but as a historically constituted not phenomenon, but as a historically constituted reality. In other words, rather than, that's why the method of Black Reconstruction is so different from the method of Das Kapital.
Right.
Okay, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
No,
Shatu.
this is just something that I have to really think about.
No, just see, because I know, you as a scientist. No, I won't say.
No,
I was going to think y'all are taught to think categorically.
No,
Does that mean scientific method?
that is the scientific method.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking about the question of the general and the special theory. Now, Einstein's special theory came first, right? So Einstein's special theory came first, and then, like about 7-8 years later, he developed the general theory of relativity. Now, looking at this chronologically, if you consider that the special theory, if you think about it in a different way, as a more specialized focus, and to use even a more a word with a negative connotation, a narrower theory, then chronologically, if Lenin's theory would have come up as the special theory and Du Bois would have come up as the general theory, because Lenin's theory was based on the transformation of the state, whereas Du Bois's theory was based on the transformation of the human being, which is more general.
Let me just say this. See, in a lot of ways, Leninism was seen as the general in its applied form.
Right.
In the same way that some people, like Midwest Marx would say, that Marx is the father of American that Du Bois is the father of American Marxism. What I read them to be saying is that Du Bois is the application of Marx to the United States.
Right.
But I would disagree. Say it is. So I would. This is what with Jerry, he raised this first. What is the special and what is the general? Obviously, it is not quite the same as what Einstein's special, general and special theory. The special was not just the application, but I don't know. You have to tell me. But is Du Bois mainly the application of something, or is Du Bois a new theoretical innovation?
Right.
But one that is anchored to the history of revolutionary ideas, modern revolutionary ideas. I think it is more than an application.
Right.
And I think when I listen to Michelle, everybody else speak about the students, it is more than an application of theory.
Yeah.
That's why, West Philly radicals coming with their ideas to the students are full of shit. Because what they're saying is, we're going to show you the application. Or you get cats from back in the day. Oh, I'm from back in the days. I'm going to show you how we did it. Come on, dog. This is way back in the days. But my point is this body of thinking, is this synthesis of, let's say, Du Bois and Baldwin, is this just an application?
Right.
Or is it a new region of theorizing?
Yeah.
But I'm saying, let him finish.
Were you done?
No, I just wanted to say one other thing, which is that I was looking at price of the ticket recently.
Oh, yes.
And there was one part in the documentary where Baldwin's biographer is talking about Baldwin and about his life in Paris. And he's saying that, oh, I once asked Jimmy that, why do you have people come over to your house all the time and then you drink and talk till 3 a.m? Why do you do that? I mean, because you're obviously tired by the end of it, and then you have to sit and write. And Baldwin just says simply that, because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to write.
Interesting.
if I didn't interact with people, talk to people, this is what I felt that he was saying, is that if I didn't do that, if I didn't know what other people are saying, talking about, if I wrote in isolation, for instance, I wouldn't be able to write at all. And I guess that was Baldwin's scientific method. And that's why in my head, he's a scientist. In all of our heads, he's a scientist because he had a scientific method to employ, which was very, very distinct from the scientific method that we are taught.
Yes.
Right?
The rationalist.
Yeah, because even like in my training as a scientist, I'm always told to ignore a personal bias, which stems from feelings and the rightness or the wrongness of things. There's only fact, and then when you really try to analyze anything, I mean, you have.
Excuse me for smiling. It's so encouraging.
The highest degree that you can get in science is a PhD, but that's called a doctor of philosophy, right? And you can get a doctor of philosophy in biology, or you can get it in comparative literature. But that means that everything has this scientific method.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I mean, but the period of scientific counter-revolution has sort of said that philosophy has always been, from the time of whatever the Greeks or the Buddha in India or Lao Tzu in China, wherever, it's always been a straight line towards the truth, how to get to the truth and how to use that truth for the betterment of human beings. And I guess the counter-revolution has sort of sidetracked it to say that pursuit of the truth is determined, is governed almost entirely by the rightness or the objective rightness and the wrongness of
This
things.
is very interesting.
Right?
Yes.
And then that needle was pushed away, and they said that no, you can't have personal bias. That is counterintuitive to scientific thinking. Scientific thinking cannot involve your personal feelings or the objective truth or the objective rightness. It's only fact. If the fact says that what you're seeing is actually something that you're not seeing, you have to believe that and not your own senses. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that the students, I guess, for the first time are breaking away from that. They are making a conscious choice to say that this is the ideology we will not believe. This is the ideology we're going to consciously reject. That you cannot tell us that our feelings, our pursuit of the truth, our perception of the rightness or the wrongness of things does not matter or is irrelevant. And I guess we're seeing that. I guess we're seeing that break from the universities and the state.
This is, this is so very important. And we'll once we go to knowledge, and this is because in the conference we use the more general concept knowledge and not just science. And I think we're going, because AI is on the table, string theory is on the table in this conference, and we're going to have to be very committed to not let these get lost, because these are examples. What we've been saying of the counter-revolution, both string theory and AI. Because of the ideological, just say, baggage that each brings with them. Not to mention, we're putting Judith Butler, AI, and string theory together as examples of a counter-revolution, well, not in knowledge, but a counter-revolution against knowledge. And that's what counter-revolutions are always against something. You know, they're barren when it comes to asserting anything, but it's always a contrast, a conflict, an opposition to, and more than not, or in essence, it is against forward movement of ideas. So, for example, if we say Baldwin Du Bois, new region of thought, to recapture, if you will, the knowledge process from a counter-revolution, that's a heavy claim. But I think it's a claim we can stand on. And like you say, what the students of their spiritual aspirations, what they aspire to, whether it's articulated or not, is that this form of knowledge, this method of thought that we have been propagandized into, that has broken us on the wheel of life, so to speak. We want an alternative. And that's what makes it superior to 1968. The essence of the aspiration.
Okay, maybe we should finish with some comments.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Todd said good morning. Yeah, happy birthday.
Speak up a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Todd, for wishing me happy birthday. Pittsburgh dude says, thank you for doing the Lord's work, preschool, peace and blessings. And Spark and Chris Romero say good morning. Todd asked, at what point do we start calling it genocide in Palestine a Holocaust? Chris Romero says, I don't understand why some socialist organizations even condemn the students for not being blue collar, as if the students aren't taking a stand against this crime against humanity.
Right.
Okay. And Spark says, Dr. Montero, facts, bullseye emoji, fire 100 emoji. Okay, Miri has a series of comments. The Black people at Penn and in Philly truly saved my life, but they also galvanized me and raised my consciousness. These thoughts on knowledge are so critical. The synthesis of art and science describes reality and human civilization and has the potential to transform the ideological structure of ordinary people and these students. Chris says, Emily brings up an interesting point on art and culture creating, like being generative rather than only reflective.
Yeah.
If art and culture provide insight into our community, why can it not help lead us to better civilizations also? And then Miri, the ideological struggle of ordinary people and students is sharpened by Du Boisian science and the Black proletariat imaginary. World humanity must witness, study, and embody this if we are to find peace. And then we have a message to Jeremiah. I recently spent some time in Montana and nearby states, which are 1% Black, and found myself meditating on the same question of how to move forward in these places as I. And then last comment, he's agreeing with Doc. Baldwin used complex, nuanced language to engage with American empire and the crisis of its civilization state in a way that subverts the simplicity and also the moral cowardice.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, it's 2:00. So that was a very packed preschool. I'm still processing. So, but we will see you guys all next week. We'll end early at 1 p.m. next week. So we'll see, but we thank all of our commenters and for all who are interested in today's discussion. This will be the central theme of our upcoming June 1st and 2nd Symposium on Science, which is the crisis of knowledge in the American university, which we will keep you all updated on and update our website with information. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye. Bye.